There's a construction paper kid standing in a courtroom in Colorado, and he's about to say something that no animated character has ever said on basic cable television. The year is 1997. The network is Comedy Central, which at this point is barely a network at all, and the show is called South Park, and the very first episode is called Cartman Gets an Anal Probe. Just sit with that for a second. That's the title of the pilot. That's what they went with. And Comedy Central said yes. And here's what kills me about the whole thing. Before this show even had a contract, before it ever touched an airwave, it was already controversial. It was already pissing people off. Because South Park didn't start as a TV show. It started as a Christmas card, a 5-minute construction paper short film made for roughly $750. And that little short, the one where Jesus and Santa Claus beat the living hell out of each other in front of 4 foul-mouthed kids, became one of the first viral videos in internet history. Before YouTube existed, before most people even had email, copies of this thing were being passed around Hollywood on VHS tapes and floppy disks like some kind of underground contraband. And the whole time, the guys who made it, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, had no idea what they'd started. So tonight, we're going through all of it. Every controversy, every scandal, every death threat, every ban, every angry letter, every time some country or religion or celebrity or government tried to shut South Park down, and every time Trey and Matt basically shrugged and said, yeah, and, because that's the story of this show. 28 seasons, nearly 3 decades, and the controversies haven't slowed down. They've gotten bigger. The most recent season, season 27, premiered in July 2025, and within 24 hours had drawn an official condemnation from the White House, the actual White House, for a cartoon made out of construction paper. So if you're watching this late at night, get comfortable, turn the lights down, because we are going to be here for a very, very long time. We're covering everything from that original short film in 1992 all the way to the latest season. And if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do that. It really does help us keep making these for you. All right, let's go back to the beginning. The story of South Park's controversies really starts before South Park existed at all. In 1992, Trey Parker and Matt Stone were film students at the University of Colorado. They'd met in class, hit it off, and spent most of their time doing silly voices instead of studying. Parker had already won a Student Academy Award for an animated short called American History, which used the same cutout construction paper style that would later define South Park. But it was December 1992 when they made the thing that changed everything. They called it The Spirit of Christmas. It was crude. It was made with actual construction paper, glue, and an old 8mm film camera. It featured 4 kids, prototypes of what would become Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny, who accidentally bring a snowman to life, and then Jesus shows up to fight it. It premiered at a student film screening, got some laughs, and then basically disappeared. That one wasn't the one that went viral. The important one came 3 years later. In 1995, a Fox broadcasting executive named Brian Graydon paid Parker and Stone $2,000 to make a new version of The Spirit of Christmas as a video Christmas card he could send to friends. The budget was reportedly about $750, with Parker and Stone keeping the rest of the commission. This time, instead of Jesus fighting a snowman, it was Jesus versus Santa Claus, arguing over the true meaning of Christmas, and then beating each other senseless while 4 kids watched and swore. Kenny gets killed. Kyle is established as Jewish. The foundation of the entire show is right there in 5 minutes. Graydon sent the short to about 80 friends in December 1995, and this is where it gets wild. One of those friends was rumored to be George Clooney. The tape got copied, and copied again, and again. Someone digitized it and put it online. And within months, this crude little cartoon had become one of the very first viral internet videos. People were huddling around office computers, sharing files that took hours to download, just to watch 4 paper kids say things you absolutely could not say on television. And look, I think about this a lot. The fact that South Park was controversial before it was even a show. The fact that the very mechanism of its creation, a Christmas card that spread without permission through bootleg copies and early internet sharing, was itself a kind of small cultural disruption. Nobody authorized this. Nobody marketed it. It just spread because people couldn't stop showing it to each other. And the thing they were sharing was a cartoon where Jesus gets into a fistfight. That's the DNA of everything that came after. South Park was born controversial. It didn't learn to be controversial. It didn't become controversial. It was made out of controversy the way other things are made out of clay. Comedy Central saw the buzz. Executive Doug Herzog watched the short and commissioned Parker and Stone to develop it into a series. And even during development, there was already friction. The very first focus group that saw the pilot reportedly hated it so much that their recommendation was to throw the entire thing in the trash. But Comedy Central's president of programming, Eileen Katz, believed in it. She later told Variety, "There are very few times in your life that you hear a pitch, you hear a script, then you put something in the machine and the planets align, birds sing, and rainbows come out," which is an amazing thing to say about a show whose first episode is called Cartman Gets an Anal Probe. But she wasn't wrong. The planets were aligning. They were just aligning around something that would make a lot of people very uncomfortable. And I want to give you a sense of what the media landscape looked like in 1997, because I think it's easy to forget how different things were. The Simpsons was the most controversial animated show on television, and it had been on the air for 8 years. It was edgy, sure, but it was on Fox. It was rated TV PG, and Bart's worst offense was making prank calls to Moe's Tavern. Beavis and Butthead had pushed boundaries on MTV, but was animated in a style that looked undeniably teenager-oriented. There was nothing, literally nothing, on American television that prepared audiences for what South Park was about to do. The level of profanity, the religious satire, the graphic violence, the sexual content, all delivered through animation that looked like it was made by a 5-year-old, was genuinely unprecedented. Ray Richmond, reviewing the show for Variety in August 1997, wrote, "Here it is, the show that will bring down the Republic, that will warp your mind, that will fry the little brain cells inside the heads of impressionable children, the one that God himself warned you about. It's South Park, the cartoon from hell. Peanuts meets A Clockwork Orange." That's one of the best descriptions of the show I've ever read. Peanuts meets A Clockwork Orange. The innocence of children's animation combined with the ultra-violence of dystopian satire. That's the combination that made South Park not just controversial, but culturally essential. On August 13th, 1997, Cartman Gets an Anal Probe aired for the first time at 10 p.m. on Comedy Central. It got a Nielsen rating of 1.3, which translated to about 980,000 viewers, which was considered huge for cable at the time. The pilot was originally broadcast during prime time, but after complaints poured in, Comedy Central moved the show to midnight starting October 17, 1997. Even with the later time slot, the audience kept growing. By the time Canada's Global TV aired the show, they had to cut the dildo jokes from the pilot and remove scenes of Kyle kicking his baby brother Ike, and they were still broadcasting it after Seinfeld, which tells you how confident they were in the audience. There's a detail about the first season that I love. Parker and Stone recorded commentary tracks for every episode of season 1, intended for the DVD release, but Comedy Central refused to include them because the commentary contained things that violated the network's standards. Parker and Stone refused to let the commentary be edited or censored, so the commentary tracks were eventually released on a separate CD, completely independent from the DVDs. Even the behind-the-scenes content about the show was too controversial for the network. Meta-controversy within meta-controversy. It's South Park all the way down, and almost immediately, the outrage machine kicked into gear. The Parents Television Council, and honestly, if you're a South Park fan, you're going to hear that name a lot tonight. The PTC called the show so offensive, it shouldn't have been made. Schools started banning South Park t-shirts. A group of school principals in New Jersey launched a campaign to warn parents about the show's content. Hickory Flat Elementary in Georgia issued an outright ban on any South Park clothing. And here's the part that I think is hilarious and kind of terrifying at the same time. In a 1999 poll conducted by NatWest Bank in the United Kingdom, 8 and 9-year-old children voted Eric Cartman as their favorite personality, not favorite cartoon character, favorite personality, above real human beings. Parent councils freaked out. The headmaster of a school in Cambridgeshire publicly urged parents to stop letting their kids watch. And look, I get it. I mean, Cartman, of all the characters for kids to love, they chose the anti-Semitic, racist, manipulative sociopath. But that's kind of the genius of it, right? Trey and Matt created a character so deplorable that his very popularity became its own controversy. You couldn't separate the show from the reaction to the show. They fed each other. But here's where I want to slow down and point out something that I think a lot of people miss when they talk about early South Park. The show wasn't just offensive for the sake of being offensive. I mean, yes, there were fart jokes. There were so many fart jokes. But from the very first season, there were also episodes like Big Gay Al's Big Gay Boat Ride, which aired on September 3rd, 1997, and was one of the most sympathetic portrayals of a gay character on television at the time. That episode was nominated for a GLAAD Award for Outstanding TV, individual episode. So even in season 1, even when the PTC was calling for the show's cancellation, there was this undercurrent of genuine empathy buried under all the shock humor. And I think that tension between the vulgarity and the heart is what makes South Park's controversies so fascinating, because they're never just about being shocking. There's almost always a point. Almost always. Okay, so the show is a hit. By the time the season 1 episode Damien aired, ratings had climbed to a 6.4. The show was setting cable records left and right. And then we get to April 1st, 1998, and one of the most audacious things any television show has ever done. See, the first season of South Park had ended on a cliffhanger. The finale was called Cartman's Mom is a Dirty Slut, and the central mystery was, who is Cartman's father? The episode ended without revealing the answer. Fans were told to tune in to the season 2 premiere to find out. It was huge. This was peak South Park mania. Comedy Central was growing faster than almost any cable network in history, largely on the back of this show. The number of households with Comedy Central jumped from 9.1 million in 1997 to 50 million by June 1998. People were dying to know who Cartman's dad was. So the season 2 premiere arrives, April 1st, 1998, April Fool's Day. And the episode begins with a recap. Clips from the cliffhanger, building tension, and then a title card appears. Not Without My Anus, starring Terrence and Phillip. Happy April Fool's Day. They didn't answer the cliffhanger. Instead, they aired a full-length episode about Terrence and Phillip, the flatulent Canadian comedy duo from the show within the show, trying to stop Saddam Hussein from taking over Canada. 22 minutes of fart jokes. No Stan, no Kyle, no Cartman, no Kenny. No answer about Cartman's father. Just farts. And I need you to understand how angry people were. Comedy Central received over 2,000 angry emails within a week. Their phones were flooded. A Comedy Central spokesman admitted that the fans got the joke. They just didn't like it. Some fans genuinely abandoned the show and never came back. Newsday's Diane Wirtz wrote, "Fans rioted. Some jumped ship and never came back." Matt Stone's response in Entertainment Weekly was, "And I love this. If you get that pissed off because you don't know who a little construction paper kid's father is, then there's really something wrong with you." I've rewatched this episode recently, and it honestly holds up way better than you'd think. It's dumb and silly and full of Canadian jokes that would become a South Park staple. But at the time, it was a genuine scandal. People compared Trey and Matt to Andy Kaufman, deliberately antagonizing their own audience as a form of performance art. And the actual answer to the Cartman's father mystery didn't come until 3 weeks later, on April 22nd, when Cartman's Mom is Still a Dirty Slut aired and pulled an 8.2 rating. At the time, the highest rated non-sports show in basic cable history. So the prank, as infuriating as it was, actually drove ratings even higher. Trey and Matt learned a lesson that would define their entire career. Controversy sells. And the best kind of controversy is the kind you create yourself. Let me go back to something I mentioned earlier about the early season, because there are a few more controversies from that period that I think are worth digging into. One that I find particularly interesting is the very first time Comedy Central self-censored the show, and it happened all the way back in season 1. The 5th episode of South Park, An Elephant Makes Love to a Pig, aired on September 10th, 1997, less than a month after the show premiered. The episode is a parody of The Island of Dr. Moreau, with Kyle trying to get the local mad scientist, Dr. Mephisto, to crossbreed an elephant with a pot-bellied pig. But there's a subplot involving Stan's sister Shelly beating him up. In the original version, there was a scene where Shelly repeatedly set Stan on fire and then doused him with water so he wouldn't die, only to set him on fire again. Comedy Central pulled the scene after the initial broadcast, specifically because they were worried about the same kind of blowback that Beavis and Butthead had received over similar material. On the DVD releases, you can still see a pool of water under Stan from the deleted scene. On the Blu-ray, even that's been removed. It's a tiny detail, but it tells you something about how early the self-censorship started. The very first season, the 5th episode. Comedy Central was already nervous. And then there's the death episode, season 1, episode 6, which aired on September 17th, 1997. This one introduced Terrence and Phillip as the show within the show that the kids watch, and the parents in South Park are horrified by the vulgarity of the cartoon. The joke, of course, is that the parents' reaction to Terrence and Phillip mirrors the real-world parents' reaction to South Park itself. It's one of the earliest examples of South Park being metafictional about its own controversy. The show was already commenting on its own cultural impact less than 2 months into its run. That's kind of remarkable. Most shows take years to develop that level of self-awareness. South Park was born with it. There's also a production detail from this era that I think is underappreciated. The pilot episode was animated using actual cutout construction paper, the same technique Parker and Stone had used for the Spirit of Christmas shorts. But after that, every subsequent episode was animated digitally, using computer software designed to mimic the cutout paper style. The show looks like it's made of paper, but it hasn't actually been made of paper since the pilot. And yet that handmade aesthetic became central to the show's identity and its controversy. Part of what made South Park so shocking was the contrast between the childlike, innocent-looking animation and the extremely adult content. It looked like a kid's show. It sounded like an adults-only show. And that cognitive dissonance, that gap between how it looked and what it said, was itself a source of outrage. I think about that connection a lot because it relates to something Parker has said about the philosophy behind the show. He's talked about how the crude animation is part of the comedy. If South Park looked like a Pixar movie, the jokes wouldn't be funny. They'd be disturbing. The paper cutout style creates a kind of shield of unreality that lets the audience laugh at things they'd normally be horrified by. It's the same reason that editorial cartoons can get away with depicting things that would be unacceptable in a photograph. The medium itself is a kind of permission slip, but not everyone accepts that permission slip. And that's where the controversies come from, because to some people, the cute animation makes the content worse, not better. It's a lure. It draws kids in. And then those kids hear Cartman say something anti-Semitic, and they don't understand it's satire because they're 8 years old and they think Cartman is funny. There's a real tension there, and I don't think it has an easy answer. Parker and Stone have always maintained that the show isn't for children and shouldn't be watched by children, but the animation style looks childish. The merchandise looks kid-friendly, and kids watched anyway. In the early years, a lot of kids watched. I actually think this is one of the most honest controversies South Park has generated. Not the individual episodes, but the fundamental question of whether satire that looks like children's programming can ever be truly responsible. And I don't know the answer. I just know it's a question worth asking. Let me also quickly touch on the Cartman's mom is a dirty slut cliffhanger from a production standpoint, because there's a detail I love. When the answer was finally revealed in Cartman's mom is still a dirty slut on April 22nd, 1998, it pulled an 8.2 rating, 6.2 million viewers. That made it the highest rated non-sports show in basic cable history at that point. During the spring of 1998, 8 of the 10 highest rated shows on basic cable were South Park episodes. The show wasn't just popular, it was a phenomenon. And it was a phenomenon that was actively trolling its own audience. The April Fool's prank, the fart jokes, the deliberate crudeness, all of it was working. Parker and Stone had figured out something that most content creators never understand. The audience doesn't just want to be entertained. They want to be surprised. They want to be challenged. They even want to be pissed off, as long as the payoff is worth it. And I want to mention one more thing about this era before we move on. At this point in late 1997, early 1998, South Park was becoming a merchandising juggernaut. T-shirts, hats, posters, toys. The characters were everywhere. Paramount's licensing arm expanded retail distribution beyond specialty stores to major retailers like Target and JCPenney. But here's the funny part. JCPenney ended its South Park tie-ins in April 1999 after customer complaints. Fast food chains didn't want to associate with the show's content at all. So you had this weird situation where the show was insanely popular, but essentially unmarketable through traditional channels. The content that made it a hit was the same content that made it toxic to mainstream brands. That tension between commercial success and cultural controversy would define the show for years to come. All right, this brings us to 1999, and the biggest, most ambitious controversy South Park would face in its first era, the movie. South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut. And honestly, the story behind this film might be more entertaining than the film itself, and the film is really, really entertaining. Development started during the first season, around January 1998. Parker and Stone signed a deal with Comedy Central that included both continuing episodes and producing a feature film. Part of their conditions was that the movie had to receive at least an R rating. They wanted to go beyond what they could do on television. Paramount Pictures, which was distributing the film, originally asked if they'd consider making it PG-13. Parker and Stone immediately refused. As Stone later told Entertainment Weekly, "We're spending tons of Paramount's money to do a big middle finger to the MPAA. We're trying to offend the MPAA." And that's exactly what happened. The MPAA, the Motion Picture Association of America, the organization that assigns ratings to films, gave bigger, longer, and uncut an NC-17 rating. Not once, not twice. The film was submitted and returned 6 times before it finally received an R rating after the 6th submission. 6 rounds of cuts and negotiations, with Parker and Stone fighting for every joke, every swear word, every boundary push. The film was a musical, a genuine Broadway caliber musical that happened to include a song called Uncle Fucka, in which the word fuck is said 31 times. The whole movie uses the word 139 times. It earned a Guinness World Record in 2001 for most swearing in an animated film, with 399 profanities, 128 offensive gestures, and 221 acts of violence. And here's a detail that I think is absolutely perfect. There was reportedly an understanding that 400 swear words would have guaranteed an NC-17 rating. They stopped at 399 on purpose. That's the most Trey Parker thing I've ever heard. The film was also originally going to be titled South Park: All Hell Breaks Loose. According to Parker and Stone, the MPAA rejected the use of the word hell in the title. The MPAA has denied this, but Parker and Stone's counterproposal was South Park: bigger, longer, and uncut, which is itself a double entendre, and the MPAA approved it. Think about that for a second. They rejected hell, but approved a dick joke, and that right there is literally the thesis of the movie. The entire plot is about how American censorship is hypocritical, how violence is fine, but language is taboo. The kids go see an R-rated movie, start swearing, and the resulting moral panic leads to the United States declaring war on Canada. It's the most self-aware movie ever made about its own controversy. Roger Ebert gave it 2.5 stars and admitted to feeling offended, writing that the MPAA has a lot of explaining to do for letting it through as an R. MPAA President Jack Valenti later said he regretted not giving the film an NC-17. In response to the controversy, the MPAA expanded its rating system in 2000 to include detailed descriptions alongside ratings. The film grossed over $83 million worldwide, making it the highest-grossing R-rated animated film of all time, a record it held until Seth Rogen's Sausage Party in 2016. And the song Blame Canada was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Original Song, which meant that Robin Williams had to perform a sanitized version at the Oscars ceremony. South Park at the Oscars. That's something nobody predicted. Oh, and one more thing about the movie that I can't resist mentioning. In the film, Saddam Hussein is depicted as Satan's abusive boyfriend in hell years later, while the real Saddam Hussein was on trial for genocide in 2006. Matt Stone joked that the US military was repeatedly showing the film to Saddam as a form of torture. Whether that's true or not, I have no idea. But the fact that it's even plausible tells you everything about this show. I want to pause here and talk about something that I think is crucial to understanding why South Park generates so much controversy. And it's not the content, it's the process. Because the way South Park is made is unlike anything else in television. And that production process is itself a kind of controversy machine. Since the 4th season, which started airing in 2000, South Park episodes have been written, voice acted, animated, and delivered to Comedy Central in approximately 6 days. 6 days, from blank page to finished episode. The 2011 documentary 6 Days to Air, which was directed by Arthur Bradford and premiered on Comedy Central on October 9, 2011, shows this process in excruciating detail. Parker pacing the writer's room at 2 in the morning, voice recording sessions happening while animation is still being finalized. The crew pulling all-nighters where, as Parker described it, it looks like it's going to be not a 5 a.m. night, but more like a 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. night. The episode being completed and transmitted to the East Coast just hours before it's supposed to air. And I think this production schedule is central to the show's controversy history for a really specific reason. It means every episode is essentially a live reaction to the current moment. When South Park makes a joke about the Chinese government in October 2019, it's because the NBA China controversy is happening that exact week. When they parody Steve Irwin in October 2006, it's because he died just 8 weeks ago. When they respond to Trump's presidency in July 2025, it's because the news cycle is happening in real time around them. The 6-day production schedule means that South Park operates more like a late-night talk show than a traditional animated series. And that means the controversies are fresh, raw, and sometimes poorly considered, because Parker and Stone don't have months of reflection time between concept and broadcast. They have days, sometimes hours. This is a feature, not a bug. The immediacy is part of what makes the show exciting, but it also means that sometimes they miss. Sometimes a joke that seems brilliant on Tuesday turns out to be hurtful by Wednesday. The Steve Irwin joke is a perfect example. In the writer's room, with the deadline bearing down, the joke probably seemed clever. Even the devil thinks it's too soon. But 8 weeks after a beloved figure's death, in front of millions of viewers, the nuance didn't land the way they intended. And there was no time to test it, no focus group, no second opinion. Just 6 days from concept to broadcast. I think this also explains why Parker and Stone are so rarely apologetic about their controversies. When you work at that pace, you don't have time for regret. You finish one episode, and you're already starting the next one. The entire production philosophy is about momentum. Keep moving, keep writing, don't look back. And that momentum makes the show great. But it also means they sometimes barrel through situations where a more cautious show would pump the brakes. There's a moment in the 6 Days to Air documentary where Parker talks about the terror of the blank page every week, starting from nothing. And he says something that I think gets at the heart of what South Park is. He says that the fear of not being funny is worse than the fear of being offensive. And I believe him. When you watch that documentary, you can see that the driving anxiety isn't, will this upset someone? It's, will this be any good? The controversy is a side effect of the creative process, not the goal of it. Parker and Stone aren't sitting in a room trying to figure out how to offend people. They're sitting in a room trying to figure out how to make each other laugh. And the things that make them laugh happen to be things that make other people very, very angry. This connects to another point I want to make about the Oscars incident, which the documentary briefly covers. In 2000, Parker and Stone were attending the Academy Awards ceremony because Blame Canada from the South Park movie had been nominated for Best Original Song, and they showed up on the red carpet wearing dresses. Stone wore a replica of the lavender Versace dress Jennifer Lopez had worn to the Grammys. Parker wore a pink number inspired by Gwyneth Paltrow's Oscar dress from the previous year. They later admitted they'd taken LSD before the ceremony. So here they are, at the most prestigious event in the entertainment industry, tripping on acid, wearing ball gowns, representing a movie about animated children who start a war over profanity, and the Academy just let them in. Because what else were they going to do? These are the creators of one of the most successful animated films ever made. They earned their seats. The dresses were just a bonus controversy. I bring this up because it illustrates something important about Parker and Stone as people, not just as showrunners. They don't compartmentalize. They don't have a professional mode and a controversial mode. The same impulse that makes them put Saddam Hussein in bed with Satan is the same impulse that makes them show up to the Oscars in dresses on acid. The controversy isn't a strategy, it's a personality. And I think that authenticity, the sense that these guys genuinely don't care what anyone thinks, as opposed to performatively not caring, is what gives South Park its power. You can tell when someone is being edgy for attention. Parker and Stone aren't being edgy, they're just being themselves. And themselves happen to be two guys from Colorado who think that nothing in the world is sacred, and that the funniest possible response to any situation is the most inappropriate one. Michael Moore actually touched on this dynamic inadvertently. After Bowling for Columbine came out in 2002, Parker and Stone were furious because Moore had included an animated segment that looked very much like South Park's style, placed immediately after an interview with Matt Stone about growing up near Columbine. The juxtaposition made it look like Parker and Stone had animated the segment, which they absolutely had not. Stone later criticized Moore for deliberately creating that false impression. It wasn't a controversy about the show's content, but it was a controversy about the show's identity. Who gets to use the South Park aesthetic, and who gets to speak for its creators? And it showed that Parker and Stone are protective of their brand in ways that might surprise people who think of them as purely anarchic. They don't care if you're offended by their show, but they care very much if you misrepresent it. Alright, the film also has a really weird piece of trivia attached to it that has nothing to do with the movie itself. The 1995 Spirit of Christmas short was secretly hidden in the data of the video game Tiger Woods 99 for PlayStation. It was included as a file labeled zzdumy.dat on the game disc, accessible by putting the disc into a computer. The game was rated E for everyone. When parents discovered that their kid's golf game contained a cartoon where Jesus and Santa beat each other up while children screamed obscenities. Electronic Arts recalled the game in January 1999. It's one of the most unlikely controversies in gaming history, and it happened because someone at EA was a South Park fan and nobody checked. Alright, I want to jump forward a bit to 2001, because something happens in Season 5 that seems completely insignificant at the time, but becomes one of the biggest deals in the show's history. On July 4th, 2001, South Park airs an episode called Super Best Friends, Season 5, Episode 3. In the episode, the boys get involved with a David Blaine cult and a team of religious superhero figures: Jesus, Buddha, Moses, Krishna, Joseph Smith, Lao Tzu, and Muhammad team up to save the day. Muhammad appears on screen. He's drawn. He has fire powers. He's depicted in a completely heroic, positive light. He's treated like any other religious figure on the show, and nobody cares. No controversy, no outrage, no death threats, nothing. The episode airs, people watch it, and life goes on. Muhammad had even appeared in the show's opening title sequence among the crowd of characters. Nobody blinked. And I keep coming back to this because of what happens later. Because this completely uncontroversial episode from 2001 becomes the center of the biggest and most dangerous controversy South Park has ever faced. But we'll get to that. The context matters. Remember this date, July 4th, 2001. 2 months before 9/11 changed everything. The early 2000s were a wild time for South Park controversies, and they came from every direction. Season 5's premiere, It Hits the Fan, aired on June 20th, 2001, and was entirely about the word shit. The episode was written as a response to the media frenzy surrounding a character on the show Chicago Hope saying shit happens on network TV. Parker's response was to write an episode where the word shit is said 162 times without being bleeped and appears in written form 32 more times, for a total of 194 uses, tracked by a counter at the bottom of the screen. And the reaction? About 5,000 complaining emails to Comedy Central. That's it, relatively tame. The episode actually made a clever point about how words lose their power through overuse. The plot involves the uncensored use of the word literally summoning an ancient evil. It was crass, sure, but it was also kind of brilliant social commentary disguised as a poop joke. And honestly, that describes about 60% of all South Park episodes. And I want to sit with that episode for a minute, because It Hits the Fan is a perfect case study in how South Park approaches controversy. The episode didn't just use the word shit for shock value. It constructed an entire mythology around it. The boys discover that there's a specific count of the word that has been maintained throughout history, and when the word is used too many times, it unleashes a plague upon the earth. Medieval knights appear to fight the evil. There's genuine world building happening alongside the profanity, and that's the trick, right? The headline is South Park says shit 162 times, but the actual episode is a sophisticated meditation on the relationship between language and cultural power. The vulgarity gets you in the door, the intelligence keeps you there, and the combination of the two generates a controversy that's more interesting than either element alone. This approach, using extreme content as a delivery system for genuine ideas, is what separates South Park from the shows that tried to imitate it. Family Guy, for all its success, is primarily a joke delivery system. The Simpsons uses satire, but stays within conventional bounds. South Park uses extreme content strategically as a way to force conversations that wouldn't happen otherwise. Nobody would have talked about television profanity standards in 2001 if South Park had just written an essay about it. But saying shit 162 times, that gets people talking. And once they're talking, the episode has a chance to actually change their minds about something. I've been doing this channel for a while now, and one of the things I've noticed is that the South Park episodes people remember most are rarely the most offensive ones. They're the ones that combined offense with insight in a way that stuck with you. Scott Tenorman Must Die isn't just shocking. It fundamentally redefines a character. Trapped in the Closet isn't just irreverent. It exposes a real institution. 200 and 201 aren't just provocative. They raise genuine questions about free speech. The controversy is the hook, but the substance is the legacy. Okay, I also want to cover something from this era that's easy to overlook, but that I think is genuinely important: the Columbine connection. On April 20th, 1999, the Columbine High School massacre happened in Littleton, Colorado. Parker and Stone grew up in the area. Stone graduated from Heritage High School in Littleton, which is in the same school district as Columbine. They were both deeply affected by the tragedy, and in different ways, it shaped the show's relationship with controversy. After Columbine, there was a massive cultural backlash against violent and offensive media. South Park, a show that had been on the air for less than 2 years and was already one of the most controversial programs in America, suddenly existed in a completely different context. The show had always been criticized for corrupting youth. Now, in the wake of a school shooting perpetrated by teenagers, that criticism carried a different weight, and Parker and Stone had to navigate the question of whether their show bore any responsibility for the culture that produced the shooters. They addressed this obliquely in the movie, which came out just 2 months after Columbine. The film's entire plot, about a moral panic over offensive entertainment leading to a war, was written before the shooting, but it took on a completely different resonance after it. The film was essentially arguing that blaming entertainment for violence is misguided and dangerous, and then a school shooting happened that made millions of people want to do exactly that. Parker and Stone have said they were genuinely worried that the movie would be seen as insensitive or tone deaf in the wake of Columbine, but they also felt that pulling the movie or changing it would be exactly the kind of knee-jerk censorship the film was arguing against. And then there's the Michael Moore connection. Moore interviewed Stone for his documentary Bowling for Columbine, and Stone talked about growing up in the Littleton area and the social isolation that might have contributed to the shooting. Stone, who is himself a gun owner, felt the interview was fair. But he and Parker were furious about a short animated segment that aired right after the interview. The segment, which depicted the history of guns in America, was done in a style that looked very much like South Park. It wasn't made by Parker and Stone, but its placement immediately after Stone's interview created the strong impression that it was. Stone called Moore out for deliberately giving viewers the incorrect impression that he and Parker had produced the animation. It was one of the rare times the South Park creators went on the offensive about someone else's use of controversy rather than defending their own. I mention all of this because I think the Columbine context is essential to understanding why South Park's controversies hit differently than other shows' controversies. Parker and Stone aren't just making jokes from a position of comfortable distance. They come from the place where the most infamous school shooting in American history happened. They know what it's like when violence isn't abstract. And I think that knowledge, that proximity to real tragedy, gives the show a depth of perspective that purely academic satirists lack. They've felt the weight of real consequences, and they keep making the show anyway. That's not recklessness. That's a considered choice about the value of comedy in a world that sometimes does terrible things. But the controversy that really defined the mid-2000s era of the show was Scientology. And this one gets complicated and kind of heartbreaking. On November 16th, 2005, South Park aired Trapped in the Closet, Season 9, Episode 12. In the episode, Stan takes a Scientology personality test, discovers he has unusually high thetan levels, and is proclaimed the reincarnation of L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology. Tom Cruise comes to visit Stan, gets told his movies are just okay, and then literally locks himself in Stan's closet, with everyone begging him to come out of the closet. John Travolta eventually joins him in the closet. The entire episode uses the closet as a metaphor for Cruise's sexuality, which had been the subject of speculation for years. Meanwhile, the actual beliefs of Scientology, the story of Xenu, the galactic overlord, the volcano, all of it, are presented on screen with a caption that reads, "This is what Scientologists actually believe." The episode was written and directed by Trey Parker, who is credited under the pseudonym John Smith. It got a 9.1 rating on IMDb and is widely considered one of the show's best episodes. And the fallout was enormous. Here's what I find fascinating about this. Nobody had really gone after Scientology on television before. As Matt Stone explained in a later podcast, everybody in Hollywood was scared of Scientology because the church was so litigious. They would just sue you. South Park didn't care. And the reaction was swift. The day after the episode aired, November 17th, 2005, a high-ranking Scientology executive named Mike Render wrote a memo to the church's leader, David Miscavige, about how to respond. This memo was later made public after Render left the church and became one of its most vocal critics. The church was mobilizing immediately. Then came what the media dubbed Closetgate. The episode was scheduled to rebroadcast on March 15, 2006, but Comedy Central pulled it at the last minute, replacing it with a rerun of Chef's Chocolate Salty Balls from Season 2. Comedy Central claimed it was a tribute to Isaac Hayes, who had announced his departure from the show 2 days earlier. But multiple media outlets reported that Tom Cruise had threatened to boycott the promotional tour for Mission Impossible 3, distributed by Paramount, which is owned by Viacom, which also owns Comedy Central, unless the episode was pulled. Cruise's representatives denied this, but the timing was suspicious, to say the least. Parker and Stone issued a response through their lawyer, signing the statement, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, servants of the Dark Lord Xenu. And then there's the Isaac Hayes story, and this is the part that genuinely makes me emotional. Hayes had voiced the character of Chef since the show's premiere in 1997. He was beloved. Chef was one of the most iconic characters on the show, and in March 2006, Hayes issued a press release saying he was leaving, stating, "There is a place in this world for satire, but there is a time when satire ends and intolerance and bigotry towards religious beliefs of others begin." Stone was devastated, but also blunt. This is 100% having to do with his faith of Scientology. He has no problem, and he's cashed plenty of checks, with our show making fun of Christians. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. For years, the narrative was that Hayes quit over the Scientology episode. But in January 2006, after the episode aired but before his departure was announced, Hayes had suffered a stroke. He lost the ability to speak. He was barely functional. And in 2016, his son, Isaac Hayes III, told The Hollywood Reporter the truth. Isaac Hayes did not quit South Park. Someone quit South Park for him. According to Hayes III, at the time of his father's departure, everyone around him, his assistants, his publicists, his management team, were Scientologists. His father was in no condition to make decisions or issue press releases. Someone within his Scientology circle made the decision and quit the show on his behalf. Hayes III has been consistent about this for years, and Matt Stone has confirmed that this is what they believe happened too. Stone told The Hollywood Reporter, "We sort of figured out the whole picture a bit later, but that's totally what happened." Think about that for a second. A man who loved his role, who loved the show, who loved connecting with fans, was separated from all of that by people who were supposed to be taking care of him. He never got to speak for himself. He died on August 10th, 2008, from another stroke, having never fully recovered from the first one. He was 75 years old, and the real story of his departure didn't come out until years later. I've thought about this a lot while putting this video together, and it might be the saddest chapter in South Park's entire history, because it wasn't just a controversy, it was a human tragedy dressed up as an entertainment industry spat, and Trey and Matt never got the chance to reconcile with Hayes before he died. They dedicated the season 12 episode, The China Problem, to his memory. The response to Hayes' departure was swift and brutal. Just days after the press release, Parker and Stone aired The Return of Chef, in which the character is depicted as having been brainwashed by a fictional group called the Super Adventure Club, an obvious stand-in for Scientology. The episode used old audio clips of Hayes' voice, spliced together to create new dialogue, and ended with Chef dying in an extremely graphic fashion. It was simultaneously a farewell to the character, a middle finger to Scientology, and looking back, a tragically misdirected response to a situation that was far more complicated than anyone knew at the time. While we're in 2005 to 2006 territory, I want to talk about another controversy that hit during that same period, because it shows you the range of things South Park was fighting about simultaneously. The season 9 finale, Bloody Mary, aired on December 7, 2005. In the episode, Randy Marsh gets arrested for drunk driving, goes to Alcoholics Anonymous, and becomes convinced his alcoholism is a disease he's powerless to control. Meanwhile, a statue of the Virgin Mary starts bleeding from its rear end, and people flock to it hoping for miraculous cures. Randy goes too, hoping to be cured of his disease. The Pope investigates and determines the blood isn't coming from the statue's rear, but from its vagina. And since women bleed from their vaginas all the time, it's not actually a miracle. The Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights went ballistic. President Bill Donahue demanded an apology and called for the episode to be permanently retired and never released until on DVD. Joseph Califano, a Viacom board member and practicing Catholic, issued a statement calling it an appalling and disgusting portrayal of the Virgin Mary. The president of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops wrote to Viacom's CEO saying the network showed extreme insensitivity. When Comedy Central re-aired all of season 9 on December 28, 2005, Bloody Mary was conspicuously absent, but the controversy went international. In New Zealand, Catholic bishops lobbied CanWest, the broadcaster, to stop a planned airing of the episode. CanWest refused and actually aired it earlier than planned to capitalize on the media attention. New Zealand's Prime Minister Helen Clark called the episode revolting, but defended the network's right to air it. In Australia, Network SBS initially refused to air the episode at all. The episode drew a record audience of over 300,000 viewers in New Zealand, 6 times the normal rating for South Park in that country. Eventually, complaints to New Zealand's Broadcasting Standards Authority were dismissed. The ruling stated that showing disrespect does not amount to the sort of vicious or vitriolic attack normally associated with the denigration standard. And look, here's the thing about the Bloody Mary episode that I think gets lost in the controversy. The actual point of the episode is really good. It's arguing that alcoholism, while serious, shouldn't be treated as a disease that absolves you of all personal responsibility. Stan's whole arc is about telling his dad that he doesn't need a miracle or a disease label. He just needs self-discipline. The karate instructor throughout the episode keeps saying that true discipline comes from within. Parker even revealed in the commentary that Randy's drunk driving arrest was based on something that happened with his own father when Trey was 9 years old. So this wasn't just irreverence for its own sake. It was personal. But the Virgin Mary bleeding from her vagina is what people remember. And that's kind of the tragedy of South Park controversies. The loudest reaction is usually about the most surface level thing, and the actual point gets buried. Let's talk about 2006 for a minute, because it might be the single most controversial year in the show's history. In addition to the Scientology fallout and the Bloody Mary aftermath, there was the Steve Irwin episode. Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, died on September 4th, 2006, when his heart was pierced by a stingray barb while snorkeling near the Great Barrier Reef. He was one of the most beloved television personalities in the world. He was 44 years old. Less than 8 weeks later, on October 25th, 2006, South Park aired Hell on Earth 2006, Season 10, Episode 11, the 150th episode of the series. The episode is about Satan throwing a Halloween party. At the party, someone shows up in a Steve Irwin costume, complete with a stingray sticking out of his chest. Satan confronts the person, initially thinking it's someone dressed as Irwin, and tells them the costume is in bad taste because Irwin died so recently. But then it turns out it actually is Steve Irwin. He's in hell. Satan kicks him out because it's a costume party, and he's not wearing a costume. And here's what I think people missed about this joke. The joke isn't mocking Steve Irwin. Satan himself says it's in bad taste. The joke is that even the devil thinks it's too soon. It's a meta joke about too soon humor. And the punchline is that Irwin is kicked out not for being dead, but for violating the dress code. It's actually a pretty clever bit, but nobody cared about the nuance. A spokesperson for Irwin's widow, Terry, said she was devastated Steve is being mocked in such a cruel way, and worried their children Bindi and Bob would see it. Irwin's colleague Mark Amy called it distasteful. British watchdog Media Watch UK condemned it as grossly insensitive. Parker and Stone said they were genuinely surprised by the reaction, noting that the episode also featured the real-life serial killers Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, and John Wayne Gacy, and nobody seemed to care about that. The thing is, I kind of get both sides here. 8 weeks is genuinely not a long time when you've lost someone you love. Terry Irwin had every right to be upset. But South Park had already parodied Irwin in a 1999 episode called Prehistoric Iceman, where he was killed by a helicopter blade, and nobody batted an eye. The difference was timing, and timing in comedy is everything, in both senses of the word. I keep thinking about how Parker and Stone work. They write episodes in 6 days. They're responding to the news cycle in almost real time, and that speed means they sometimes hit subjects that are still raw. The Steve Irwin joke wasn't mean-spirited. If you watch it, it's actually kind of sweet in a weird way, but it landed at a moment when people weren't ready for it. And there's a lesson in there about the difference between what a joke means and what a joke does. Alright, I want to shift gears and talk about the Muhammad episodes, because this is where South Park went from being a controversial cartoon to being at the center of a genuine international crisis. And if you've made it this far, you already know this isn't a light video. The first time South Park depicted Muhammad on screen was in Super Best Friends, the 2001 episode I mentioned earlier. No controversy. He was a superhero with fire powers. He was treated with the same irreverence and the same respect as every other religious figure on the show. That episode aired on July 4th, 2001. Then 9/11 happened. And then, in September 2005, the Danish newspaper Jyllands-Posten published 12 editorial cartoons depicting Muhammad. The response was global, and violent. Riots broke out across the Middle East. Embassies were attacked. Over 100 people died in protests. Multiple cartoonists received death threats and went into hiding. The world had fundamentally changed in how it understood the risk of depicting Muhammad in any visual form. South Park first addressed this head-on in 2006 with the two-part season 10 episodes Cartoon Wars. These were episodes 5 and 6 of the season, airing on April 5th and April 12th, 2006. And I want to spend some time on these because I think they're underrated in the controversy timeline. They usually get overshadowed by episodes 200 and 201, but they were really the opening salvo of the whole Muhammad saga. The plot of Cartoon Wars involves Family Guy planning to show Muhammad in an episode. Muslim terrorists threaten retaliation. Cartman, who hates Family Guy for his own petty reasons, teams up with the forces trying to censor the episode, while Kyle fights to have it air uncensored. The genius of the two-parter is that it works on multiple levels simultaneously. It's a genuine commentary on censorship and fear. It's a vicious parody of Family Guy's writing style, and it's a meta-commentary on South Park's own position in the censorship debate. At one point, there's a sequence where Family Guy airs the Muhammad image, and nothing happens. The world doesn't end. Nobody gets hurt. But then in the second part, when the South Park characters try to air their own Muhammad image, Comedy Central censored it. They put up a black screen that said Comedy Central has refused to broadcast an image of Muhammad on their network. And here's what makes this so layered. The episode within the episode was about a network censoring a cartoon depiction of Muhammad. And then the actual network censored the actual cartoon's depiction of Muhammad. The fiction and reality collapsed into each other. South Park was literally experiencing, in real time, the exact scenario it was satirizing. That almost never happens in television. It would be like if a show about government surveillance got pulled off the air by a government agency. The medium became the message in the most literal way possible. Parker and Stone were allowed to include the censorship screen, but not the actual image. They publicly noted the contradiction. They were allowed to show Jesus and Buddha and Moses being mocked in every possible way, but a benign, neutral depiction of Muhammad was forbidden. And the reason wasn't religious respect. It was fear. Comedy Central was afraid of getting bombed. And to their credit, they admitted it. The network told Parker and Stone they were afraid of getting blown up, rather than claiming religious tolerance. I remember reading about Parker and Stone's reaction to this whole situation, and what struck me was how genuinely frustrated they were. Not in a "we're rebels fighting the man" kind of way, but in a "this is genuinely unfair and we don't know how to fix it" kind of way. They've said repeatedly that their only real regret about the Cartoon Wars episodes was that the Family Guy feud got more attention than the censorship commentary. People were debating which show was funnier, instead of debating whether fear should dictate what you can and can't show on television. And that's a genuinely depressing observation, because it means the censorship was working. The real conversation got drowned out by the entertainment controversy. And that's exactly what censorship is designed to do. Redirect attention away from the thing you're not supposed to see. There's also a production detail about Cartoon Wars that I think is worth mentioning. In part 2, when the censorship screen appears, there was actually supposed to be a scene where Muhammad hands Peter Griffin a football helmet, a completely benign, positive depiction. Comedy Central refused to allow it, so Parker and Stone replaced it with a scene where Jesus defecates on President Bush and the American flag, which Comedy Central did allow. The contrast was deliberate and devastating. You can show Jesus doing the most degrading thing imaginable to the President of the United States, but you can't show Muhammad handing someone a helmet. That double standard is the entire thesis of the episode, and Comedy Central proved it by their own actions. Then came 2010, and episodes 200 and 201, and this is where things got genuinely terrifying. To celebrate their 200th episode, Parker and Stone decided to create a greatest hits spectacular. Every celebrity who had ever been mocked on the show returned to file a class action lawsuit against the town of South Park. Tom Cruise assembles them. The only way to drop the lawsuit is for the town to bring Muhammad to Cruise, so he can steal Muhammad's apparent superpower, the power to never be ridiculed. Episode 200 aired on April 14, 2010. Muhammad appeared, but was always obscured, behind a black censored bar, inside a U-Haul truck, inside a bear costume. It was South Park pushing right up to the line without crossing it. The episode was brilliant. It was funny. It was a love letter to the show's history. And then the threats came. A website called revolutionmuslim.com, run by a New York-based Islamist organization, posted a warning that Parker and Stone risked being murdered. The post included a photograph of the murdered Dutch filmmaker Theo van Gogh, who had been stabbed and shot to death in Amsterdam in 2004 for making a film about the treatment of women in Muslim country. The post included the addresses of Comedy Central's New York and Los Angeles offices. The author wrote, "We have to warn Matt and Trey that what they are doing is stupid, and they will probably wind up like Theo van Gogh for airing this show. This is not a threat, but a warning of the reality of what will likely happen to them." The New York City Police Department increased security at Comedy Central's headquarters. The FBI got involved. This was no longer a television controversy. This was a legitimate security situation. And then 201 aired on April 21st, 2010, and Comedy Central panicked. Without consulting Parker and Stone, the network inserted audio bleeps over every single mention of Muhammad's name. They censored multiple lines of dialogue, and they censored almost the entirety of the episode's final 3 speeches by Kyle, Jesus, and Santa Claus about the moral of the story. The speeches were about how violence and threats shouldn't be used to suppress free speech. Comedy Central censored a speech about censorship. Parker and Stone were livid. South Park Studios posted a statement saying Comedy Central had inserted numerous additional bleeps without the creator's permission. The episode, as it aired, was a heavily censored version of what Parker and Stone intended. The uncensored version wasn't supposed to exist publicly, but a partially uncensored version was discovered on Comedy Central's web server by a user on 4chan and distributed across the internet. The response from the media and public figures was significant. Jon Stewart dedicated 10 minutes of The Daily Show to the controversy, expressing disgust at Revolution Muslim and telling them, in so many words, to go fuck themselves. Bill Maher said the threats demonstrated the importance of the First Amendment. Senator Joe Lieberman publicly criticized Revolution Muslim. The man who posted the threats, Zachary Chesser, was later arrested and sentenced to 25 years in federal prison on charges including communicating threats and attempting to provide material support to a terrorist organization. Both episodes were pulled from Comedy Central's website, removed from streaming platforms, and excluded from syndication. Super Best Friends, the 2001 episode that had aired without any controversy, was also pulled because it contained a depiction of Muhammad. In the Region 2 and Region 4 DVD releases of Season 14, episodes 200 and 201 were removed entirely, despite the packaging claiming all 14 episodes were included. The commentary tracks for both episodes are essentially silent. Parker opens by saying, "They did the episode as intended and sent it in." Then a long bleep obscures everything. Stone says, "Yeah, that's pretty much it." They never mention Muhammad by name in the commentary, referring to him only as the prophet of the Muslim faith. I honestly can't think of another time in television history where a show was censored to this degree by its own network, against the wishes of its creators, in response to threats of violence. And what makes it even more surreal is that the speech that was censored, Kyle's final speech about using violence to silence people, was proven right by the very act of censoring it. The message was, if you threaten violence, you get what you want. And Comedy Central proved that message correct by giving in. Let me give you a little more context about how this played out in real time, because I think the timeline matters. Episode 200 aired on April 14, 2010. The next day, Revolution Muslim posted their threatening message. On April 19th, the FBI opened an investigation. On April 21st, 201 aired with Comedy Central's additional censorship. On April 22nd, Jon Stewart dedicated 10 minutes of The Daily Show to the controversy. On May 1st, just 10 days after 201 aired, there was a failed car bomb attempt in Times Square, and Congressman Peter King publicly speculated about whether the South Park controversy might have been a possible motive. Revolution Muslim denied any connection, and the eventual suspect had apparently been planning the attack for months before the controversy. But the fact that a sitting congressman was drawing a line between a cartoon and a bombing attempt in the middle of New York City tells you how far this had escalated. Zachary Chesser, the Revolution Muslim member who posted the threatening message, was arrested in July 2010, not primarily for the South Park threats, but for attempting to provide material support to Al-Shabaab, a Somali terrorist organization. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Jesse Curtis Morton, another member of the organization, was also arrested and sentenced to 11.5 years. The South Park controversy wasn't the main reason they were arrested, but it was part of the pattern of behavior that drew law enforcement attention. And here's a detail that I think is worth noting. In the days after the Revolution Muslim post, the website also posted what appeared to be personal information about where Parker and Stone lived, along with information about the location of Comedy Central's offices. Parker later said in interviews that the period was genuinely frightening, not in an abstract, oh, there's controversy way, but in a we might actually be in physical danger way. For a few weeks, the two most successful comedy writers in America were walking around with security details because they'd drawn a picture. I keep thinking about what that does to a person psychologically. Parker and Stone are known for being fearless, for not caring what anyone thinks. But fear of physical violence is different from fear of criticism. And the fact that they went right back to work after the crisis, that they continued making the show, continued pushing boundaries, continued being themselves, says something about their commitment that goes beyond just being edgy. You can be edgy from a position of safety. What they did after 200 and 201 was continue being controversial from a position of genuine risk. That's something different entirely. And the aftermath had lasting effects on the show's library. When South Park eventually moved to streaming platforms, episodes 200, 201, and Super Best Friends were not included. For years, these episodes were essentially impossible to watch through any legal channel. Super Best Friends, which remember, aired in 2001 without any controversy whatsoever, became collateral damage of a controversy that happened 9 years later. That episode depicted Muhammad as a superhero, alongside Jesus and Buddha, in a completely positive light. It was retroactively deemed too dangerous to air because the world had changed around it. The episode itself hadn't changed. The context had. There's a broader lesson there about how controversy works in a cultural landscape that never forgets. In the pre-internet era, a controversial episode aired, generated outrage, and then faded from memory. But now, controversial content lives forever online. It can be discovered, reshared, and recontextualized years after its original airing. Super Best Friends went from being a fun, harmless episode to being a banned episode, not because of anything it did, but because of what other events, the Danish cartoons, the revolution Muslim threats, turned it into. The episode became controversial through no fault of its own, simply by existing in a changed world. And that's something I think a lot of people don't appreciate about South Park's controversy history. The show doesn't just generate new controversies, it retroactively generates old ones. Episodes that were perfectly fine when they aired become problematic as the cultural context shifts. The Steve Irwin joke wasn't controversial until he died. The Jared Fogle jokes weren't that controversial until Fogle was arrested. The Super Best Friends Muhammad depiction wasn't controversial until the Danish cartoon riots. South Park exists in a state of perpetual retroactive controversy, where the past keeps catching up to the present. I want to also mention something that happened around this same period that I think shows how the controversy machine works from the inside. Parker and Stone gave an interview, I think it was with The Hollywood Reporter, where they talked about the emotional toll of the 200/201 situation. And one of the things that struck me was how matter-of-fact they were about it. Not dismissive, not bragging, just honest. They said it was scary. They said they were worried about their families. And then they said they went back to work because that's what they do. And I think that honesty, that willingness to admit fear without letting it change their behavior, is more courageous than any specific joke they've ever written. Alright, let me take a breath and talk about some of the international controversies, because South Park hasn't just pissed off Americans, it's pissed off the entire world. I've spent a lot of time thinking about these episodes while working on this video, and I keep coming back to something Parker said in an interview. He said the saddest part wasn't the threats themselves, it was that their mockery of Family Guy in the earlier Cartoon Wars episodes generated more attention than their commentary on the ethics of censorship. People cared more about the feud between two animated shows than about whether a society should be allowed to use fear to shut down speech. And I think he's right. And I think that's still true. And I think it's a problem. Okay, I want to take a breather here and talk about something that I don't think gets discussed enough when people talk about South Park's controversies: the show's relationship with Comedy Central and the whole corporate structure above it. Because the network is as much a character in this story as Parker and Stone are. Comedy Central is owned by Paramount Global, which at various points has also been owned by or affiliated with Viacom. That means the same corporate family that distributes Mission, Impossible Movies, and runs CBS and MTV also puts out South Park. And that creates this incredibly weird dynamic where the parent company sometimes has financial incentives to censor its own most profitable show. The Tom Cruise situation with Trapped in the Closet is the clearest example. Viacom needed Cruise to promote MY3, and Cruise allegedly threatened to stop doing promotion unless the episode was pulled. So the corporate parent essentially had to choose between a $90 million movie campaign and a 22-minute cartoon. The cartoon lost. But here's what makes it interesting. Parker and Stone have never left. They've fought with Comedy Central constantly over the Muhammad censorship, over the Isaac Hayes situation, over content in individual episodes, but they've never walked away from the network. And the network has never canceled them. It's this bizarre codependent relationship where both sides need each other, but neither side fully trusts the other. Comedy Central needs South Park because it's been the network's flagship show for nearly 3 decades. And Parker and Stone need Comedy Central because the network, for all its occasional censorship, has given them more creative freedom than they'd get almost anywhere else. The 2025 deal, reportedly $1.5 billion for 50 episodes, shows just how valuable that relationship is to both sides. And I think this dynamic is actually central to understanding the show's controversies, because a lot of the most dramatic moments, the Muhammad censorship, the Closet Gate cancellation, the pulling of episodes 200 and 201 aren't really about South Park versus the outside world. They're about South Park versus its own network. The controversy is coming from inside the house, and Parker and Stone have been masterful at using those internal conflicts as material for the show itself. Every time Comedy Central censors something, it becomes a plot point. Every time a corporate overlord pulls a move, it gets folded into the narrative. The show has essentially turned its own production challenges into content. That's a level of meta creativity that I genuinely think is unprecedented in television. Let me talk about another aspect of South Park's controversy history that I think is really important: the show's evolving politics. Because this is where things get really messy and really interesting. For most of its run, South Park has been described as libertarian, skeptical of authority, suspicious of both liberal and conservative orthodoxy, and fundamentally committed to the idea that individuals should think for themselves. In the early 2000s, this manifested as a pretty even split between left-leaning and right-leaning targets. They went after environmentalists and gun control advocates in some episodes, and then turned around and mocked racists and homophobes in others. The term that got attached to this approach was South Park Republican, coined by a writer named Andrew Sullivan, who used it to describe young conservatives who were fiscally conservative but socially liberal, and who appreciated the show's irreverence toward political correctness. Parker and Stone have always rejected this label. They've consistently described themselves as neither liberal nor conservative. Stone once told a reporter, "I hate conservatives, but I really hate liberals." Parker told Rolling Stone, "I've never voted in my life." They position themselves as people who are disgusted by anyone who takes their own beliefs too seriously. And for a long time, that position felt genuinely neutral. When they mocked Al Gore's climate change advocacy and the Church of Scientology in the same breath, it felt like they were genuinely committed to equal opportunity offense. But here's where it gets complicated. In the 2000s, as political polarization intensified in America, the equal opportunity framing started to feel less neutral and more politically loaded. Mocking both sides equally in a political landscape where the sides aren't equally powerful or equally dangerous can itself be a political statement. And South Park's insistence on treating every position as equally worthy of mockery meant that, in practice, the show sometimes gave ammunition to bad actors while undermining people trying to address real problems. The man-bear-pig situation is the clearest example. For 12 years, South Park told its audience that climate change concern was paranoid and silly. That's not a neutral position. That's a political stance with real-world consequences. I bring this up not to condemn the show, but because I think it's part of the controversy story. Some of South Park's most impactful controversies haven't been about specific offensive jokes, but about the overall political posture of the show and what that posture does to public discourse. When millions of people absorb the message that everyone who cares passionately about anything is a sucker, that has effects, and those effects are themselves controversial. The show seemed to recognize this in later seasons. The introduction of PC Principal in season 19 as a recurring character was initially read as another attack on political correctness, and it was. But over time, the character evolved. He became more nuanced. He wasn't just a straw man, he was a genuine, if flawed character who sometimes had a point. And the show's treatment of political correctness shifted from pure mockery to something more complex. They started acknowledging that maybe some of the things PC culture was trying to address were real problems, even if the methods were heavy-handed. And that evolution, I think, is what's made the show's latest era, the Trump era, so fascinating. Because Parker and Stone finally stopped trying to be neutral. They picked a side. And for a show that built its identity on not picking sides, that's its own kind of controversy. I should clarify what I mean by picked a side, because it's more nuanced than it sounds. Parker and Stone haven't become Democrats. They haven't joined a political party. They haven't endorsed candidates. What they've done is focus their satirical energy disproportionately on the Trump administration and the MAGA movement, because, as they've explained in multiple interviews, that's where the most absurd behavior is happening right now. They spent years mocking what they saw as left-wing excesses, PC culture, pronoun debates, over-the-top social justice warriors. And those targets were fair game when they were the dominant cultural force. But the political landscape shifted, and Parker and Stone shifted with it. Not because they changed their politics, but because the targets changed. Parker explained this in a way I thought was really illuminating. He said that during the Trump era, they realized they'd been wrong about something fundamental. They'd always believed that political correctness was the biggest threat to comedy and free expression. But Trump showed them that there was something even more threatening. A political movement that doesn't just reject political correctness, but rejects the very concept of truth. PC culture could be annoying and restrictive, but it at least operated within a shared reality. MAGA, in Parker and Stone's view, created its own reality. And for satirists who depend on a shared understanding of what's true in order to show what's absurd, that's existentially threatening. I bring this up because I think it reframes the controversy. When the White House calls South Park irrelevant, they're not just dismissing a cartoon. They're trying to define what counts as legitimate discourse. And South Park's response, "We're terribly sorry," is a refusal to accept that definition. It's the same move they've been running since 1997, but the stakes are different now. Mocking Scientology is one thing. Mocking the sitting president of the United States, while his administration is actively threatening media companies, is another. And that leads me to a point about the Paramount deal that I think is underappreciated. The $1.5 billion deal was signed on the same day as the season 27 premiere, the episode that depicted Trump in bed with Satan, hours apart. And the episode itself references the Paramount Trump settlement, with Jesus explaining that he's at South Park Elementary because Paramount made a deal with Trump, and he's contractually obligated to be there. The show is commenting on its own corporate parent's relationship with the president. On the same day, it signs a massive contract with that corporate parent. That's a level of creative audacity that's almost hard to comprehend. Parker and Stone are biting the hand that feeds them, and the hand is writing them a bigger check than ever. Either Paramount has an incredibly evolved sense of humor, or, more likely, they understand that the controversy is the product. That's what they're paying for, not a polite cartoon, a controversial one. But we'll come back to that. First, let me catch you up on some more specific controversies from the 2000s that we haven't covered yet. Season 15's Human Centipede in 2011 was a parody of the film The Human Centipede, with Kyle getting surgically attached to an iPad and another person after he agrees to Apple's terms and conditions without reading them. The episode generated complaints from parents who found the body horror imagery too extreme, even by South Park standards, and from people who felt the show was trivializing the concept of sexual violence. Apple didn't comment publicly, which was itself kind of funny. A trillion-dollar company decided the best strategy was to pretend the episode didn't exist. Then there's the Whale Whores episode from season 13, episode 11, which aired on October 28, 2009. In this one, Stan joins an anti-whaling crew to stop Japanese whalers from slaughtering whales and dolphins. The episode is a savage takedown of both Japanese whaling practices and the reality show Whale Wars, whose host Paul Watson is depicted as an incompetent blowhard who gets harpooned early in the episode. The episode features extremely graphic scenes of dolphins and whales being killed, and the Japanese characters are depicted in ways that many critics called racially stereotypical. The twist, that the Japanese believe whales and dolphins dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, based on a doctored photograph planted by the US government, is a brilliant piece of absurdist commentary on historical revisionism. But the depiction of Japanese characters screaming, "Fuck a you, whale, fuck a you, dolphin," became a massive meme and generated significant criticism for its portrayal of Japanese people. Interestingly, Parker and Stone were annoyed when Paul Watson and environmental activists praised the episode because they'd made it specifically to trash Watson, not to make a pro-whale statement. The Japanese fan community actually received the episode more positively than Western critics expected, appreciating the subtext about the atomic bombing. And there's the China program from season 12, which aired in 2008. This one has two controversies packed into a single episode. The A-plot involves Cartman dealing with what he perceives as a Chinese threat, playing on post-Olympics anxieties. But the B-plot is what got people talking. It features Indiana Jones being repeatedly brutalized by Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, depicted as graphically as South Park's animation allows. The scene is a parody of the feeling fans had after watching Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, that Spielberg and Lucas had ruined a beloved character. It was deeply uncomfortable to watch, and a lot of people felt it crossed a line, using extreme imagery as a metaphor for a disappointing movie sequel. I've gone back and forth on this one myself. It's effective in conveying the raw anger fans felt, but the imagery is disturbing in a way that overshadows the satirical point. The Crack Baby Athletic Association episode from season 15 in 2011 drew fire for its depiction of impoverished infants being exploited for entertainment, which was a pretty direct satire of the NCAA's treatment of college athletes, who at that time were not being compensated for their efforts. The documentary 6 Days to Air showed Matt Stone bringing up the NCAA compensation issue during the writing process. The episode features Cartman setting up an organization that exploits young players for profit while giving them nothing in return, a direct parallel to how the NCAA operated at the time. The comparison was intentionally provocative, and while the underlying point about exploitation was valid, the execution made a lot of people uncomfortable. I keep bringing up these individual episodes because I think it's important to understand the sheer volume of controversy South Park generates. It's not like the show has 2 or 3 famous scandals. It has dozens, maybe hundreds. Every season brings new targets, new outrage, new calls for cancellation. And the cumulative effect of all that controversy is that South Park has become a kind of cultural Rorschach test. Tell me which South Park controversies bother you, and I can tell you a lot about your values, your politics, and your tolerance for uncomfortable ideas. If you're still with me, we're going to jump forward a bit now. Because the 2000s brought a whole new era of South Park controversies, and some of them came from directions nobody expected. One of the more subtle controversies of this era was the man-bear-pig situation. But before I get to that, let me talk about South Park's history of pissing off entire nations, because it's not just China. The show has had problems with countries all over the world. Russia has banned several episodes over the years, including Bloody Mary for its depiction of the Virgin Mary. In the United Kingdom, the show was originally broadcast very late at night. A Channel 4 representative said it was for the audience coming back from the pub with a curry. Australia's SBS network refused to air Bloody Mary initially, though it eventually showed the episode on SBS Viceland in 2016, 11 years after it originally aired. New Zealand's broadcasting of the Bloody Mary episode led to formal complaints, a boycott campaign, and even a court order attempt, though ultimately the complaints were dismissed. But beyond individual episodes, several countries have taken a more systematic approach to South Park. The show has been banned outright in a few places. China is the most famous example, but it's worth remembering that the show was censored or restricted in various ways across the Middle East and parts of Asia long before the Banned in China episode. Some of these restrictions are about religion, particularly the Muhammad depictions, and some are about general content. The show's frequent use of blasphemy, profanity, and sexual content puts it at odds with broadcasting standards in many countries where these things are regulated far more strictly than in the United States. And then there's the question of how the show deals with different countries and cultures. South Park's treatment of Canada, the flapping heads, the aboot pronunciation, the Kraft dinner obsession, is one of the show's most enduring running jokes. It started with the Terrence and Philip characters and has continued for the show's entire run. Canadians generally seem to find it amusing rather than offensive, which speaks to the relationship between the two countries. But the show's treatment of other nationalities hasn't always gone over as well. The show's Chinese characters, particularly Tuong Lu Kim, the owner of City Walk, speak in heavily accented English that many viewers have criticized as a racist caricature. In a clever twist, the show eventually revealed that Lu Kim was actually a white man named Dr. William Janus with dissociative identity disorder, which is either a brilliant deconstruction of the stereotype or just another layer of offense, depending on your perspective. The show's approach to racial and ethnic humor is probably its most consistently controversial aspect over the long run, not because of any single episode, but because of the accumulated weight of 28 seasons of jokes about racial stereotypes. The show would argue, and has argued, that it treats all groups equally, that no one is protected, and that satire requires the ability to mock anyone. Critics would argue that equal opportunity offense is a myth in a society where different groups face different levels of real-world discrimination, and that a joke about white people doesn't land the same way as a joke about a marginalized group. Both sides have a point, and the tension between those points is never going to be resolved. It's just going to keep generating controversies, season after season, until the show ends. Let me get back to Man Bear Pig, because I think that situation reveals something important about the show's relationship with its own legacy. In 2006, South Park aired an episode called Man Bear Pig, where Al Gore is depicted as a delusional, attention-seeking fool who keeps warning everyone about a non-existent creature called Man Bear Pig. The creature was a transparent metaphor for climate change. The episode came out around the same time as Gore's documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, and the message was clear. Parker and Stone thought climate change was being overblown. This wasn't controversial in the traditional sense. Nobody boycotted the show. Nobody issued death threats. But it aged badly. Climate change turned out to be very real. And to their enormous credit, Parker and Stone acknowledged this. 12 years later, in the 2018 two-part episodes Time to Get Cereal and Nobody Got Cereal, Man Bear Pig returned, and he's real, and he's devastating. And the boys apologized to Al Gore for not listening. And Gore, being Gore, doesn't just accept the apology, he's kind of annoying about it, which is peak South Park. I think this is one of the things that sets South Park apart from almost every other piece of political comedy. They admitted they were wrong, on air, in character. How many shows do that? How many comedians issue on-screen corrections of their previous position? It doesn't erase the original episode. There were 12 years where South Park was essentially telling millions of viewers that climate change concern was silly. That matters. But the course correction matters too. And the willingness to say, we got this wrong, is something I genuinely respect. The show kept pushing into new territory throughout the 2000s and 10s. In 2014, the season 18 premiere tackled the Washington Redskins controversy by having Cartman name his startup company the Washington Redskin, knowing that the trademark had been canceled and he could use the name. The real Washington Redskins organization sent a legal letter to Parker and Stone, which of course only made the whole thing funnier. That episode, Go Fund Yourself, season 18, episode 1, which aired on September 24th, 2014, was classic South Park in its ability to take a hot-button issue and find the angle that nobody else had thought of. The Redskins controversy at the time was about whether the name was racist. South Park's contribution was to point out the absurdity of trademark law as it related to offensive names, and to create a situation where the right side of the debate, not using the name, was represented by Cartman, who was only doing it for selfish financial reasons. The show had this incredible ability to make everyone uncomfortable, regardless of which side of the issue they were on. And while we're talking about the 2014 to 2016 era, I want to spend a bit more time on the serialization experiment, because it generated its own kind of controversy, not from the outside, but from within the fan base. Seasons 19 and 20 represented a major departure for South Park. Instead of standalone episodes, the show moved to season-long story arcs with continuing plot lines. Season 19, which aired from September to December 2015, introduced PC Principle and dealt with political correctness, gentrification, and media manipulation. Season 20, airing from September to December 2016, tried to tackle the presidential election in real time, with a storyline about online trolling, internet culture, and the rise of member berries, little fruit-like creatures that represented nostalgia-driven politics. And here's where it got complicated. Parker and Stone have said publicly that they went into season 20 expecting Hillary Clinton to win the election. They'd built a storyline around that assumption. When Trump won on November 8, 2016, they had to scramble. The episode that aired the day after the election, Oh Geez, was originally titled The Very First Gentleman and had been written with Clinton's victory in mind. They rewrote it overnight. The result was not their best work, and the fans noticed. The serialization experiment generated controversy because it produced some of the weakest South Park episodes in years. The continuous storylines meant that individual episodes felt incomplete and unsatisfying. The week-to-week plotting was hampered by the show's 6-day production schedule, which is perfect for reactive, standalone episodes, but poorly suited for long-form narratives that need to be planned in advance. And the 2016 election, which upended the planned storyline, exposed the vulnerability of the approach. Parker has been refreshingly honest about this. He's said that the serialization was a mistake, that they lost something important when they moved away from standalone episodes. And starting with season 21, the show returned to a more episodic format, with some recurring threads, but without the strict serialization of seasons 19 and 20. It was a rare public admission of creative failure from two guys who rarely admit to being wrong about anything. I bring this up because I think it illustrates an often overlooked aspect of South Park's controversy history: the creative controversies. Not everything that generates debate about South Park is about content or offense. Sometimes the debate is about quality, about whether the show has lost its edge, about whether Parker and Stone, now multimillionaires many times over, can still capture the anarchic energy of two broke college students making a construction paper Christmas card. And that's a valid debate. The show is almost 30 years old. Of course it's changed. Of course some seasons are weaker than others. The question is whether the overall trajectory is one of decline or evolution, and reasonable people can disagree. My own take, and this is purely personal, so take it or leave it, is that the show has gotten less consistently funny, but more consistently thoughtful. Early South Park could make you laugh until you cried, but the insights were often secondary to the humor. Current South Park sometimes sacrifices laughs for commentary, but when it connects, when a joke lands with both humor and insight, the way the China apology did, or the way the season 27 premiere did, it's more powerful than anything the show was doing in its early years. The ceiling is higher now, even if the floor is lower. Season 19 in 2015 and season 20 in 2016 saw the show experiment with season-long serialization for the first time, with recurring storylines about political correctness, embodied by the character PC Principal, and the 2016 presidential election. Parker and Stone struggled publicly with how to handle Trump. They initially used the existing character of Mr. Garrison as a Trump stand-in rather than creating a Trump character, because they felt Trump was already so absurd that parodying him was nearly impossible. Stone told the press that Trump was essentially already South Park, but the Trump era created a different kind of controversy for South Park, one that came from the show's own fans. For years, South Park had been seen as an equal opportunity offender that mocked both the left and the right. But as American politics became more polarized, that position became harder to maintain. Conservative fans who had loved South Park's mockery of environmentalism, political correctness, and celebrity activism grew uncomfortable when the show turned its sights on Trump. Liberal fans who had criticized the show for years suddenly started praising it. The identity of the show became contested ground in the culture war. And Parker and Stone, who have always described themselves as very down-the-middle guys, found themselves caught in the middle of a fight they'd been stoking for 2 decades. Alright, let me take you to 2019, because what happens next is probably the most geopolitically significant thing South Park has ever done. On October 2nd, 2019, South Park aired Banned in China, Season 23, Episode 2, the 299th episode overall. And I genuinely think this might be the episode with the biggest real-world impact in the show's entire run. The episode has 2 storylines. In one, Stan's death metal band gets offered a biopic deal, but the filmmakers keep censoring the story to make it acceptable to the Chinese government. The boys learn that to succeed in the international entertainment market, they have to compromise everything about themselves. In the other storyline, Randy Marsh travels to China to expand his Tegrity Farms marijuana business, gets arrested, and ends up in a labor camp alongside Winnie the Pooh and Piglet, a reference to China's ban on Winnie the Pooh imagery after internet memes comparing Xi Jinping to the character. The episode directly calls out Hollywood studios, the NBA, and basically every American corporation that self-censors to maintain access to the Chinese market. Within days of the episode airing, South Park was completely erased from the Chinese internet. Every clip, every episode, every online discussion, every social media mention, gone. The show was searched on Weibo and returned 0 results from billions of past posts. Full seasons disappeared from Alibaba-owned streaming service Youku. South Park was, in effect, banned from a nation of 1.4 billion people. Parker and Stone responded with what might be the greatest press release in entertainment history. Like the NBA, we welcome the Chinese censors into our homes and into our hearts. We too love money more than freedom and democracy. She doesn't look just like Winnie the Pooh at all. Tune into our 300th episode this Wednesday at 10. Long live the great Communist Party of China. May this autumn's sorghum harvest be bountiful. We good now, China? That statement is so perfect, it almost makes me angry. It's sarcastic, it's defiant, it's funny, and it directly references the NBA China controversy that was dominating the news at the time. Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey had tweeted support for Hong Kong's pro-democracy protesters, and the NBA had scrambled to apologize to China. South Park saw the biggest companies in America bowing to an authoritarian government, and said no. Actually, they didn't just say no. They said, "May this autumn's sorghum harvest be bountiful." That's a level of trolling that transcends language barriers. Bloomberg News reported that Apple, which has significant manufacturing and user bases in China, was unlikely to bid for South Park's streaming rights because of the China ban. The controversy was actually affecting the show's business prospects, and Parker and Stone clearly did not care. They continued to critique China's censorship in subsequent episodes, making it a recurring theme throughout season 23. I think about this episode a lot because it represents something important about South Park's role in American culture. This wasn't a joke that offended a religious group or a celebrity. This was a cartoon show taking on one of the most powerful governments on Earth, and that government responded not with a strongly worded letter, but by erasing the show from an entire country's internet. The power dynamic was completely different from anything South Park had dealt with before. And the fact that Parker and Stone didn't flinch, the fact that they responded with a mock apology that openly taunted the Chinese Communist Party, says something about the show's fundamental character that I think is worth paying attention to. And I want to provide a little more context about why the Banned in China episode hit as hard as it did. Because it wasn't just about China. It was about every Western institution that had been quietly self-censoring to maintain access to the Chinese market. The NBA had just apologized to China after a single tweet from a team executive supporting Hong Kong protesters. Disney had been filming parts of Mulan in Xinjiang, where China was operating mass internment camps for Uyghur Muslims. Google had been developing a censored search engine for the Chinese market. Apple was removing apps at the Chinese government's request. And Hollywood studios were routinely editing their films to avoid offending Chinese censors, removing references to Taiwan, cutting scenes featuring Tibetan culture, even digitally altering maps to include China's disputed territorial claims. South Park pointed at all of this and said, "You gotta lower your ideals of freedom if you want to suck on the warm teat of China." That line became instantly iconic. It crystallized something that a lot of people had been feeling, but hadn't been able to articulate. The sense that American institutions were trading their values for market access, and that nobody wanted to say it out loud because they were all doing it. The timing with the NBA controversy was almost too perfect. The same week Banned in China aired, the NBA was in the middle of a full-blown crisis. Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey had tweeted support for Hong Kong's pro-democracy protesters. Chinese broadcasters pulled Rockets games. Chinese sponsors pulled funding. The NBA issued an apology that many Americans found disgraceful. And in the middle of all this, South Park aired an episode that called out exactly this kind of capitulation, and then got banned from China for doing it, and then responded by mocking China even harder. It was like watching a show write its own sequel in real time. Bloomberg News later reported that Apple, which has a significant portion of its manufacturing and user base in China, was reportedly unlikely to bid for South Park's streaming rights because of the China ban. The controversy was actually affecting the show's business prospects, and Parker and Stone clearly did not care. They continued to critique China's censorship in subsequent episodes, making it a recurring theme throughout season 23. The follow-up episode, Let Them Eat Goo, even parodied LeBron James amid the NBA China controversy. And here's a thought that I keep returning to. The Banned in China episode might actually be the most consequential thing South Park has ever done. Not because it changed Chinese censorship policy, it obviously didn't, but because it changed the conversation in America about how Western companies engage with authoritarian governments. Before Banned in China, the self-censorship was happening quietly. After the episode, and the ban, and the mock apology, and the massive media coverage, it became a topic of mainstream public discourse. People started paying more attention to how Hollywood was editing films for China. Politicians started asking questions about corporate complicity. And while South Park obviously wasn't the only force driving this conversation, it was one of the most visible and effective signals. A construction paper cartoon did more to raise awareness about corporate self-censorship than any number of think tank reports or editorial columns. That's the power of comedy at its best. Not just making people laugh, but making them see something they've been trained not to notice, and then making them angry about it, and then making them laugh about their anger, which somehow makes the anger more productive rather than less. South Park at its best doesn't just comment on the world, it changes how people look at the world, and Banned in China is one of the clearest examples of that power in action. Let me pause here for a second and say something about the pattern we're seeing. Because if you've been paying attention, you'll notice that South Park's controversies follow a kind of escalation curve. In the late 90s, the controversies were about profanity and crude humor, schools banning t-shirts, parents complaining about fart jokes. In the early 2000s, they escalated to religion, Scientology, Mormonism, Catholicism. Then came the Muhammad episodes, where the threat wasn't angry letters, but physical violence. And now, in the 2000s and 2000s, the controversies have become geopolitical. Entire nations banning the show. The White House issuing official condemnations. The stakes keep getting higher, and the show keeps pushing. Remember what I said at the beginning? That South Park was born controversial? Well, it's also aging controversial. And the fact that it's still generating this level of reaction after nearly 3 decades is, in its own way, remarkable. Most shows lose their edge. South Park has somehow gotten sharper. Let me tell you about some of the other controversies that I want to make sure we cover, because this show has pissed off so many different groups over the years that it would be criminal to skip them. There's the With Apologies to Jesse Jackson episode from season 11, which aired on March 7, 2007. In this episode, Randy Marsh says the N-word on national television during a game show, and the rest of the episode deals with the fallout. The word is used 43 times, uncensored. And here's what's remarkable. Despite all those uncensored uses of one of the most inflammatory words in the English language, the episode generated relatively little controversy. In fact, the NAACP and many Black community leaders praised the episode for its context and its comedic way of conveying how minorities feel when they hear the word used casually by non-minorities. The episode makes Randy look like a complete fool, which he is, and centers the emotional impact on the people hurt by the word. It's one of the most nuanced episodes the show has ever done, and the fact that it managed to use the N-word 43 times and come out the other side with praise from civil rights organizations tells you something about the intelligence behind the vulgarity. Then there's The China Problem from season 12, which aired in 2008. This one has 2 controversies packed into a single episode. The A plot involves Cartman dealing with what he perceives as a Chinese threat, but the B plot is what got people talking. It features Indiana Jones being repeatedly sexually assaulted by Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, depicted as graphically as South Park's animation allows. The scene is a parody of the feeling fans had after watching Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, that Spielberg and Lucas had violated a beloved character. It was deeply uncomfortable to watch, and a lot of people felt it crossed a line, using sexual assault as a metaphor for a disappointing movie. I've gone back and forth on this one myself. It's effective in conveying the raw anger fans felt, but it uses imagery that trivializes something very real and very serious. The Crack Baby Athletic Association episode from season 15 in 2011 drew fire for its depiction of crack-addicted babies being exploited for entertainment, which was a pretty direct satire of the NCAA's treatment of college athletes, who at that time were not being compensated for their efforts. The episode features Cartman dressed like Leonardo DiCaprio's character from Django Unchained, calling NCAA athletes slaves. The documentary 6 Days to Air showed Matt Stone bringing up the NCAA compensation issue during the writing process. The comparison was intentionally provocative, and while the underlying point about exploitation was valid, the execution made a lot of people uncomfortable. The Jared Has AIDS episode from season 6, which aired on March 6th, 2002, became far more controversial in hindsight than it was at the time. The episode centered on Jared Fogle, then known simply as the Subway spokesman, who lost weight eating sandwiches. In the South Park version, Jared announces that he actually lost weight because he got AIDS, personal trainers and dietitians, which everyone mishears as AIDS. There's a running joke about Jared giving AIDS to children. At the time it aired, this was just a dumb pun. 12 years later, in 2015, the real Jared Fogle was arrested and convicted of child sex abuse. Suddenly, the joke about giving AIDS to children felt far less like a pun and far more like a prophecy. South Park didn't know about Fogle's crimes. Nobody did. But the coincidence was eerie enough that the episode became one of the most cited examples of South Park predicting the future. I also want to mention the All About Mormons episode from season 7, which aired on November 19th, 2003. In this episode, a Mormon family moves to South Park, and the episode explains the origins of the Mormon faith, Joseph Smith, the golden plates, the hat, the seer stones, while repeatedly showing the text, "Dum dum 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 dum," whenever the story seems particularly unbelievable. And here's what's interesting. Despite the episode being one of the most thorough takedowns of a religion's founding mythology ever aired on television, the Mormon Church's reaction was remarkably calm. They didn't boycott. They didn't threaten lawsuits. They basically shrugged it off. Parker later said he was genuinely impressed by the Mormon community's response, and that respect eventually led him and Stone to create the Book of Mormon, the Tony Award-winning Broadway musical that affectionately parodies the religion. So a South Park controversy actually led to one of the most successful musicals of the 21st century. That's a trajectory nobody could have predicted. Speaking of the Mormon episode, there's a detail in the ending that I think is really telling about Parker and Stone's approach to controversy. The new Mormon kid, Gary, gives a speech to Stan where he essentially says, yeah, the origin story sounds ridiculous, but his family is happy, they love each other, and their faith gives their lives meaning. He tells Stan that if he can't respect that, then all I can say is suck my balls. It's a perfect South Park moment because it simultaneously mocks and validates the religion. The founding story is presented as absurd, but the human value of faith and community is respected. And that duality, the ability to hold two contradictory ideas at once, is what separates South Park from lesser satirists who just tear things down without acknowledging any value in what they're destroying. I think that's why the Mormon Church responded the way it did. They recognized that the episode, while irreverent, wasn't hateful. Compare that to how Scientology responded to Trapped in the Closet with its lawyers and memos and pressure campaign. The difference in response tells you more about the institutions than it does about South Park. Let me also talk about a controversy that doesn't get enough attention: the pandemic special episodes. When COVID-19 hit in 2020, South Park responded with a series of standalone specials rather than regular episodes. The first one, the Pandemic Special, aired on September 30th, 2020, and it dealt with the origins of the pandemic, depicting Randy Marsh as having had sex with a pangolin in China, thus creating COVID-19. The episode also addressed police brutality, remote learning, and vaccine politics. It was one of the most watched cable telecasts of the year, drawing about 3.2 million viewers, which was remarkable for a cable show in an era of declining linear television viewership. The pandemic specials generated controversy on multiple fronts. Some critics felt the show was trivializing the pandemic at a time when people were dying. Others felt the pangolin sex joke was racist in its implications about the virus's origins. And some felt the show's treatment of lockdowns and mask mandates, which was skeptical in classic South Park fashion, was irresponsible during a public health crisis. But the specials also received significant praise for capturing the frustration and absurdity of life during COVID, better than almost any other piece of media at the time. And the Randy Pangolin joke, while gross, was actually a commentary on conspiracy theories about the virus's origins, not an endorsement of them. The joke was that Randy was the kind of person who would do something that dumb and then try to cover it up. I want to expand on this a bit because the pandemic specials represented a really interesting moment in South Park's history. The show had always been about responding to the present moment, but COVID was different from any previous crisis. It wasn't a single event that could be satirized and moved on from. It was an ongoing, evolving situation that lasted for years and affected every aspect of life. Parker and Stone had to figure out how to satirize something that their audience was living through in real time, something that was causing real death and real suffering. That's a different challenge than satirizing a celebrity scandal or a political debate. The solution they came up with, the Paramount Plus specials format, was itself controversial within the fanbase. Instead of regular 22-minute episodes, the specials were 45 to 60 minutes long and aired on Paramount's streaming platform rather than on Comedy Central. Some fans saw this as a betrayal of the show's roots. South Park had always been a cable show. Putting specials behind a streaming paywall felt corporate in a way that South Park had never felt before. The specials were part of the massive deal with Paramount. 14 movies and specials total, spread across several years. And the financial scale of that deal, $900 million at the time, made some fans uncomfortable. Could a show that was supposed to be anti-establishment really be owned by and beholden to a $900 million corporate contract? Parker and Stone have addressed this tension indirectly through the show itself. The Tegrity Farms storyline, in which Randy becomes a marijuana farmer obsessed with his own brand of integrity, or Tegrity, while constantly selling out for money, reads as a pretty obvious self-parody. Randy insists he has integrity while making increasingly mercenary decisions, and the other characters roll their eyes at his hypocrisy. It's Parker and Stone making fun of themselves for being two guys who preach anti-corporatism while cashing enormous corporate checks. And the fact that they're aware of the contradiction and willing to satirize it is, I think, their way of staying honest. They know what they are. They know the compromises they've made, and they'd rather make fun of themselves for it then pretend it isn't happening. The pandemic specials also introduced some storylines that would become important later. The vaccination subplot, in which different characters have different reactions to the COVID vaccine, became a recurring source of controversy as real-world vaccine debates intensified. South Park's treatment of vaccines was characteristically even-handed. It mocked both the anti-vaxxers and the self-righteous pro-vaccine crowd. But in a polarized environment, even-handed often translates to, everyone is mad at you. Anti-vaxxers thought the show was dismissing their concerns. Pro-vaxxers thought the show was creating a false equivalent. And South Park, as always, shrugged and moved on. This is another example of what I'd call the South Park paradox. The show is simultaneously too offensive and not offensive enough, depending on who you ask. Some people think it goes too far. Some people think it doesn't go far enough, and both groups are often complaining about the same episode. Now, let me circle back to something I want to spend some time on, because I think it's one of the most important but least discussed aspects of South Park's controversy history: the show's influence on the broader culture. South Park premiered in 1997. Family Guy premiered in 1999. Adult Swim launched in 2001. These are not coincidences. South Park didn't just reflect the culture, it changed it. It demonstrated that there was a massive, profitable audience for adult animation that pushed boundaries. Before South Park, the most provocative animated show on television was The Simpsons, which, for all its satire, operated within pretty conventional bounds. South Park blew those bounds apart and proved that audiences would not only tolerate, but actively seek out content that made them uncomfortable. And that influence extended beyond animation. The show helped create a cultural space where transgressive humor was commercially viable. For better or worse, a lot of the comedy landscape of the 2000s and 2010s, from Dave Chappelle to Daniel Tosh, to the entire culture of internet shock humor, owes something to the door that South Park kicked open. And that means South Park bears some responsibility, not just for its own controversies, but for the controversies generated by the culture it helped create. I'm not saying that's all bad. Some of the most important comedy of the last 2 decades has been transgressive and provocative. Chappelle's Show, The Boondocks, Moral Orel. These shows existed in a space that South Park helped create, and they did brilliant, important work. But the door swings both ways. For every thoughtful piece of transgressive comedy, there's 100 pieces of lazy shock content that mistake offensiveness for insight. And South Park's success showed people that being offensive could be profitable, which attracted a lot of people who had the offensive part down, but we're missing the insightful part. This is also a good time to mention something that I think often gets lost in discussions about South Park's controversies. The show has actually been on the right side of a lot of issues. Big Gay Al's Big Gay Boat Ride was a compassionate portrayal of homosexuality, when very few shows were even willing to address it. Best Friends Forever, which won an Emmy in 2005, took on the Terry Schiavo Right to Die case with surprising nuance. The Man Bear Pig Course Correction showed an unusual willingness to admit error, and even the most controversial episodes usually contain a genuine moral perspective underneath the shock value. There's also the matter of the show's Emmy track record, which tells you something about how the industry views South Park's controversies. The show has been nominated for Outstanding Animated Program 18 times and has won 4 times. For Best Friends Forever in 2005, Make Love, Not Warcraft in 2006, Margaritaville in 2009, and Raising the Bar in 2012. The Imagination Land trilogy even won a separate Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program for programming 1 hour or more in 2008. So the Television Academy is basically saying, yes, this show is incredibly controversial, and also it's some of the best work being done in animation. Both things are true at the same time, and the financial numbers back that up too. When the show first hit, it helped Comedy Central grow from 9.1 million households to 50 million in about a year. The 2021 deal, before the even bigger 2025 deal, was reportedly worth $900 million and included seasons through 2027 plus multiple streaming specials. The 2025 deal pushed the total even higher. South Park is, by any measure, one of the most commercially successful television properties in history, and every dollar of that success was earned through content that somebody, somewhere, found deeply offensive. That's a remarkable business model when you think about it. And I want to dwell on those numbers for a second, because I think they tell a story that the controversy narrative sometimes obscures. South Park isn't just surviving despite its controversies. It's thriving because of its relationship with controversy. The show has turned provocation into a sustainable business model that has lasted longer than most non-controversial shows managed to survive. Think about the shows that premiered around the same time as South Park: Buffy the Vampire Slayer, King of the Hill, Ally McBeal, Dharma, and Greg, The Practice. Some of those were great shows. Some were huge hits. None of them are still producing new episodes in 2025. South Park's longevity isn't accidental. It's a direct consequence of the show's willingness to remain relevant by remaining controversial. Every time the culture shifts, South Park shifts with it. Every time a new sacred cow appears, South Park takes aim. And every time somebody says the show has gone too far, that declaration generates enough attention to fuel another season. There's a feedback loop at work here that I think is genuinely novel in entertainment history. The show generates controversy. The controversy generates attention. The attention generates viewers. The viewers generate revenue. The revenue funds more episodes. The new episodes generate new controversy, and the cycle begins again. It's been running continuously since 1997, and if anything, it's accelerating. The 2025 season drew more attention than any season in years, partly because of the quality of the episodes, but largely because the White House handed them the biggest publicity gift imaginable by publicly condemning the show. I also want to point out something about the economics of controversy that I think is under-discussed. South Park has always been remarkably cheap to produce compared to other hit shows. The animation style, while sophisticated under the hood, doesn't require the massive budgets of a Pixar-level production, or even a traditional hand-drawn animated series. The voice cast is tiny. Parker and Stone do the vast majority of the voices themselves. The writing staff is small. The 6-day production schedule means there's no wasted time, no extended development hell, no army of consultants. So the profit margins on South Park are enormous relative to other shows of comparable cultural impact. And that gives Parker and Stone incredible leverage with the network. When you're generating massive profits on a tiny budget, you can afford to be controversial because the financial risk is low and the potential reward is high. The worst that can happen is an episode gets pulled or a market gets lost, and the show keeps making money anyway. This economic resilience is, I think, one of the unsung reasons for the show's controversial durability. Parker and Stone aren't just creatively brave, they're financially bulletproof. And that combination, courage plus economic security, is what allows them to take risks that other creators can't or won't. Let me talk about one more thing before we move into the most recent era, the Harry and Meghan episode. In the 2023 season 26 episode, The Worldwide Privacy Tour, South Park parodied Prince Harry and Meghan Markle by depicting a thinly veiled version of the couple, called The Prince of Canada and His Wife, who complain endlessly about their lack of privacy while simultaneously doing everything possible to draw attention to themselves. The episode aired in the wake of the couple's Netflix documentary and Harry's memoir, Spare, and it was absolutely savage. The real-world response was significant. Multiple media outlets reported that Meghan was upset by the episode, while Harry reportedly took it more in stride. The episode went viral, with clips shared millions of times on social media, and it became a flashpoint in the already intense public debate about the Sussexes. Some people saw the episode as bullying. Others saw it as a fair critique of the couple's perceived hypocrisy. And the fact that it came from South Park, a show that has mocked literally everyone, gave it a kind of credibility that a more partisan attack wouldn't have had. I bring this up because it illustrates something important about how South Park's controversies work in the social media age. In 1997, a South Park controversy meant angry emails to Comedy Central and a segment on the local news. In 2023, a South Park controversy means trending worldwide on Twitter within hours, clips going viral on TikTok, think pieces in every major publication, and the targets of the satire responding in real time. The mechanism of the controversy has changed completely, even if the show's approach hasn't. And that's actually made South Park more powerful, not less. In the old model, the show pissed off specific groups who had specific grievances. In the new model, every episode is a potential culture war flashpoint that dominates social media for days. The show's 6-day production cycle, which has been their standard since season 4, where episodes are written and produced in the week before they air, means they can respond to the news cycle faster than almost any other scripted show on television. And social media means those responses get amplified instantaneously. South Park in 2025 is basically a weekly editorial cartoon that reaches millions of people and generates a new controversy every Wednesday night. That doesn't excuse everything. South Park has absolutely said and shown things that caused real harm to real people. The Irwin family's pain was real. The Chinese citizens who lost access to a show they enjoyed suffered real consequences. And some of the show's earlier treatment of topics like race and sexual assault hasn't aged well. But I think any honest assessment of South Park's controversy history has to grapple with both sides, the genuine insight and the genuine damage. All right, let's bring this all the way to the present, because what happened in July 2025 might be the most South Park thing that's ever happened. After a 2-year hiatus, South Park returned with season 27, premiering on July 23rd, 2025, just hours after Trey Parker and Matt Stone signed a new deal with Paramount, worth reportedly $1.5 billion for 50 new episodes and streaming rights across Paramount+. The very first episode of the new season directly depicted Donald Trump for the first time. For years, Parker and Stone had avoided putting a Trump character on the show, using Mr. Garrison as a stand-in instead. But now, they went all in. The episode shows Trump in a relationship with Satan, echoing the show's 1999 depiction of Saddam Hussein as Satan's boyfriend. There are scenes of Trump in bed with the devil. The character is portrayed with a micro-penis. There's a deepfake assisted sequence showing a live-action rendering of a fat, naked Trump stumbling through the desert. Jesus appears at South Park Elementary because Paramount made a deal with Trump, and he's contractually obligated to be there, a direct reference to the Paramount-Trump settlement over a lawsuit related to a 60 Minutes interview. And the episode references the Jeffrey Epstein case, the cancellation of Stephen Colbert's Late Show, and multiple other current events. All of this in the first 22 minutes of the comeback. Within 24 hours, the White House issued an official statement. Spokesperson Taylor Rogers said, "This show hasn't been relevant for over 20 years and is hanging on by a thread with uninspired ideas in a desperate attempt for attention." They called it fourth rate and said the left has no authentic or original content. And here's what I find absolutely hilarious about this. The White House responded to South Park. The actual White House, the most powerful office on earth, took time out of its day to issue a press release about a cartoon made of construction paper. If you wanted to prove that South Park is still relevant, you couldn't do it better than having the White House call it irrelevant. That's not a criticism, that's an endorsement. Parker's response at Comic-Con International just 1 day later was perfect. "We're terribly sorry," followed by a long, deadpan stare. That's it. That was the whole response. And it echoed their mock apology to China almost perfectly. It's the same move they've been running since 1997. Someone tells them to stop, and they shrug and keep going. And the ratings back them up. Season 27's second episode averaged 6.2 million global multi-platform viewers in its first 3 days. The highest live ratings on Comedy Central since 2018. So much for not being relevant. Since then, the show has continued its assault on the Trump administration through seasons 27 and 28, depicting J.D. Vance as Trump's minion. Vance took it in stride, posting on X, "Well, I've finally made it," showing a plastic surgery-ravaged Kristi Noem going on a puppy-killing rampage, a reference to her autobiography's admission that she killed her family dog, and even showing Satan as Trump's prisoner in the White House. Parker told the New York Times, "It's not that we got all political, it's that politics became pop culture." And that line, "politics became pop culture," deserves some unpacking, because I think it's the key to understanding both the current era of South Park and the entire arc of its controversy history. See, for most of South Park's run, politics was just one target among many. The show would do a political episode, then a celebrity episode, then a social trend episode, then a pop culture episode. Politics was part of the rotation. But starting around 2015, with the rise of social media outrage culture and the increasing politicization of literally everything in American life, politics stopped being one topic among many and became the dominant topic. The air you breathe, the water you swim in. You couldn't escape it, and neither could South Park. Parker described this process in the New York Times interview in a way that I think is really honest. He said they kept having conversations in the writer's room about doing non-political episodes, but every time they tried, the political stuff would bleed in, because politics wasn't just in Washington anymore. It was in your grocery store, your kid's school, your social media feed, your family dinner. And a show that draws its material from the absurdities of everyday life couldn't avoid politics, because politics had become everyday life. I think this is also why the White House's response was so interesting and so misguided. By calling South Park irrelevant and fourth rate, they were doing exactly what the show predicted they would do. The season 27 premiere literally shows Trump suing anyone who makes fun of him and forcing Paramount to make pro-Trump content as part of a settlement. And then the real White House issued a statement that sounded almost exactly like something the fictional Trump would say in the show. Parker and Stone didn't even have to write new material. Reality was writing it for them. The viewership numbers from this era tell an important story too. Season 27's premiere drew the highest live ratings for Comedy Central since 2018. The second episode hit 6.2 million multi-platform viewers in its first 3 days. For a show that the White House called irrelevant, those are remarkable numbers, and they suggest something that I think the critics of South Park consistently underestimate. The audience isn't just watching despite the controversy. They're watching because of it, not in a rubbernecking way, not because they want to see something shocking, but because they want to see someone say the thing that nobody else is willing to say. In an era where every institution, every corporation, every public figure is carefully managing their message, there's a genuine appetite for a voice that doesn't manage anything, that just talks. And I want to be careful here, because I know that framing South Park as some kind of heroic free speech warrior can be reductive. The show has made plenty of jokes that punch down instead of up. It's been wrong about major issues. It's caused genuine pain to specific individuals. But I also think it's impossible to look at the full arc of the show's controversy history, from the spirit of Christmas to the White House condemnation, without acknowledging that there's something meaningful about a voice that refuses to be silenced. Not because every individual thing it says is correct or admirable, but because the act of speaking freely, consistently, for nearly 3 decades is itself a kind of cultural contribution. There's a Matt Stone quote that I keep coming back to. He said it years ago, in response to criticism that South Park was too offensive. You can't do satire if there are certain things you're not allowed to make fun of. And I think that's true. You might disagree with any specific joke, any specific target, any specific approach, but the principle that satire requires the freedom to go anywhere is sound. And South Park has demonstrated that principle more consistently and more visibly than any other show in television history. That's worth something, even when individual episodes miss the mark. And I think that line, "politics became pop culture," is maybe the most insightful thing Trey Parker has ever said about what they do. Because that's the thread that connects every controversy we've talked about tonight. From the original Spirit of Christmas short to the White House press release, the constant through all of it is that South Park exists at the intersection of entertainment and reality. It takes real things, religions, celebrities, political figures, social movements, and puts them through the South Park filter. And the reason the controversies keep happening isn't that Parker and Stone are trying to offend people. It's that they refuse to treat anything as sacred. In a culture that's increasingly divided over what can and can't be said, a show that insists on saying everything will always be controversial. But here's the thing that I keep coming back to, and I think it's the key to understanding why South Park has survived for almost 3 decades, while other envelope-pushing shows have faded. South Park isn't just contrarian. It's not just saying the opposite of whatever's popular. It has a consistent moral worldview that runs through everything, even the most offensive episodes. And that worldview is basically, think for yourself, don't follow mobs, don't let fear control you, and don't take yourself too seriously. That's it. That's the core of every South Park controversy. When they mock Scientology, they're saying, think for yourself. When they refuse to censor Muhammad, they're saying, don't let fear control you. When they parody political correctness, they're saying, don't follow mobs. And when they put the president in bed with Satan, they're saying, don't take yourself too seriously. You might disagree with how they express that worldview. You might think the Steve Irwin joke was too soon, or the Man Bear Pig episode was irresponsible, or the sexual assault metaphor in the China program went too far. And you might be right. I think some of those criticisms are valid. But the consistency of the underlying philosophy is what makes South Park more than just a shock value factory. There's a brain behind the fart jokes. There's a heart behind the profanity. And there's a coherent set of values behind every controversy. When I started researching this video, I expected to find a list of offensive moments. What I actually found was something closer to a cultural history of America's changing boundaries. South Park's controversies are a map of what America was worried about at every moment in the last 28 years. In the late 90s, we were worried about kids hearing swear words. In the early 2000s, we were worried about religious sensitivity. In the 2000s, we were worried about authoritarian censorship. In the 2020s, we're worried about political extremism. South Park didn't create any of these anxieties. It just had the audacity to make fun of them. And maybe that's why the show keeps going. Not because people love controversy, though some definitely do, but because there's something genuinely valuable about a voice that refuses to shut up. In a world where everyone is walking on eggshells, where companies self-censor for the Chinese market, where networks pull episodes because of threats, where politicians attack comedians for being disrespectful, there's something almost heroic about two guys from Colorado who keep making the same dumb, smart, vulgar, brilliant construction paper show week after week for 28 years without ever once backing down. I say almost heroic because, they also made an episode where Indiana Jones gets sexually assaulted. Let's not get carried away. But I will say this. There are exactly 6 episodes of South Park that have been truly banned or pulled from circulation out of over 338 that have aired. That's less than 2%. And most of those were pulled not because of public outrage or corporate pressure, but because of threats of violence. The show has withstood angry parents, furious religions, offended celebrities, hostile governments, and the full weight of the American cultural establishment's disapproval. And it's still here. It signed a $1 billion deal in 2025. It's getting the highest ratings it's had in years. It just got condemned by the White House. And Trey Parker's response was, "We're terribly sorry." I've been working on this video for a while now, and the thing that strikes me most is how the controversies have changed South Park's relationship with its own audience. In the early years, the fans were the ones getting pranked and pissed off. The April Fool's episode, the cliffhanger fakeout. Now, the fans are co-conspirators. They share the mock apologies. They celebrate the bans. They treat each new outrage as a badge of honor. The controversy isn't something that happens to the show anymore. It's something the show does, together with its audience, to the rest of the world. And maybe that's the most controversial thing of all. Not any individual episode or joke, but the idea that a significant chunk of the population finds solidarity in a show that refuses to be polite. That's either deeply healthy or deeply troubling, depending on your perspective. Probably both. Alright, if you're still listening, thank you. Genuinely. I know this has been a long one, and if you've fallen asleep somewhere in the middle, that's okay too. That's what we're here for. But if you're still awake, I want to leave you with something. The next time someone tells you that South Park has gone too far, or that it's not relevant anymore, or that it's just a dumb cartoon, remember this. This show has survived Scientology lawyers, Islamic death threats, Chinese government censorship, the White House, the MPAA, the Catholic League, the PTC, angry fans, dead celebrities' families, and 3 decades of people saying it should be canceled. And it's still here. And it's still exactly the same show it was in 1997. 4 construction paper kids in a small Colorado town saying the things nobody else will say. There's something beautiful about that. Crude, vulgar, offensive, and beautiful. Here's one more thought I want to leave you with, and it's something that's been nagging at me ever since I started working on this. When you look at all the controversies we've talked about tonight, the profanity, the religious satire, the death threats, the government bans, the White House condemnations, the one thing that ties them all together is that every single one of them happened because someone was paying attention. South Park has never been controversial in a vacuum. Every controversy required an audience that cared enough to react. And every reaction, whether it was an angry email or a death threat or a press release from the White House, confirmed the same thing. The show matters. That's the real controversy when you think about it. Not any individual joke or episode, but the fact that a cartoon made of construction paper matters this much to this many people. That's either deeply reassuring or deeply unsettling, depending on how you look at it. Maybe it's reassuring because it means we still care about ideas, even when they come in crude packages. Or maybe it's unsettling because it means our public discourse is significantly shaped by the opinions of 2 guys from Colorado who started out making Christmas cards for $750, probably both. You know what's funny? I just realized that I've been talking for a very long time, and I haven't even mentioned some of the smaller controversies that I originally planned to include, like the time Matt Stone and Trey Parker showed up to the 2000 Oscars ceremony wearing dresses. Stone wore a lavender dress that Jennifer Lopez had worn to the Grammys, and Parker wore a knockoff of the pink Versace dress Gwyneth Paltrow wore when she won her Oscar the year before. They'd taken acid before the ceremony. That's not really a controversy in the South Park sense, but it tells you everything about the guys making the show. They treat the entire world the way they treat their characters, as material. Nothing is sacred, including themselves. And I haven't mentioned the Tiger Woods 99 incident properly. The 1995 Spirit of Christmas short was hidden on the PlayStation disc as a file called ZZDUMMY.dat, and kids who put the disc in a computer could find it. The game was rated E for everyone. It was recalled in January 1999. That's one of those stories that sounds made up, but isn't. South Park was literally hiding inside other people's products, spreading without authorization, causing controversy by existing in places it wasn't supposed to be. It's almost poetic. The show has never been contained. There's also the Stanley's Cup episode from season 10, which aired on November 15, 2006, and features one of the darkest endings in the show's history. A kids' hockey team gets absolutely destroyed by a professional team while a cancer-stricken child watches. The child, who was promised that the team would win for him, is left crying. No redemption, no happy ending, just devastation. The episode was deliberately subverting the inspirational sports movie formula, and it worked, but a lot of viewers found it genuinely unpleasant rather than funny. It's one of those episodes where the line between dark comedy and just darkness becomes really thin. And the Scott Tenorman Must Die episode from season 5, episode 4, aired July 11th, 2001, is considered one of the best episodes ever made, with a 9.6 rating on IMDb. In it, Cartman feeds Scott Tenorman's parents to him in a bowl of chili. It's one of the most disturbing things ever shown on a cartoon, and it was the episode that cemented Cartman as not just a bully, but a genuine sociopath. The controversy around it was more cultural than institutional. Nobody boycotted the show over it, but it fundamentally changed how the audience understood the character. After Scott Tenorman Must Die, every Cartman episode carries a weight of menace that wasn't there before. The show created a villain, and then had to live with the consequences of that villain's existence for the next 2 decades. I mention these because I think South Park's less famous controversies are just as interesting as the big ones. The big controversies, Muhammad, Scientology, China, Trump, get all the attention because they involve powerful external forces. But the smaller ones, the episodes that made people uncomfortable, not because of who they offended, but because of what they depicted, tell you more about the show's creative DNA. Parker and Stone aren't just provocateurs who like poking powerful entities. They're storytellers who are genuinely interested in the darkest corners of human behavior. And sometimes, the darkest corners don't involve any celebrities or governments at all. Sometimes they're just a 9-year-old feeding a teenager his own parent. The Scott Tenorman Must Die episode deserves a little more attention than I gave it earlier, because I think it's the episode that most clearly demonstrates what makes South Park different from every other controversial show. The episode aired on July 11th, 2001, season 5, episode 4. In it, Cartman is humiliated by an older kid named Scott Tenorman, who tricks him into buying his pubic hair for $10. Cartman spends the entire episode plotting increasingly elaborate schemes to get revenge, all of which fail, until the final twist. Cartman arranges for Scott's parents to be shot by a farmer by manipulating events so that they trespass on his property during pony killing season. Yes, that's a real plot point. He then has their bodies ground up and made into chili, which he serves to Scott at a chili cook-off. Scott eats his parents, and then Cartman licks his tears. When I first watched this episode, and I think most people have this reaction, I was genuinely stunned. Not by the violence, which South Park had done before, but by the coldness of it, by the premeditation, by the fact that Cartman didn't just win. He orchestrated a scenario so elaborate and so cruel that it redefined what the character was capable of. Before this episode, Cartman was a bully. After this episode, Cartman was a monster, and the show never walked it back. Every subsequent Cartman episode carries the weight of Scott Tenorman Must Die. You can never quite forget what he's capable of. And the controversy here isn't the kind that generates press releases or boycotts. It's more insidious than that. It's the controversy of a show that made you empathize with, or at least find funny, a character who is, by any objective standard, a psychopath. Because Cartman is still funny after Scott Tenorman Must Die. He's still entertaining. You still root for him in some twisted way. And the fact that the show can make you laugh at someone this monstrous raises questions about your own moral compass that are genuinely uncomfortable. That's not the kind of controversy that generates a headline. It's the kind that keeps you up at night. I think this episode is also important because it represents the moment when South Park stopped being just a shock comedy show and became something genuinely literary. The plotting is intricate. The character development is permanent. The emotional impact is lasting. These are things you associate with prestige dramas, not construction paper cartoons. And the fact that South Park achieved this level of storytelling sophistication while remaining one of the most vulgar shows on television is, I think, its most underrated accomplishment. The show proved that you don't have to choose between being smart and being crude. You can be both, and if you're both at the same time, the result is more powerful than either quality alone. There's a lesson in there for everyone who creates content. The lesson isn't be offensive. The lesson is be honest. Parker and Stone's honesty, their willingness to explore the darkest impulses of their characters without flinching, to follow a joke to its logical extreme, even when that extreme is horrifying, to say the thing that everyone is thinking, but nobody wants to say, is what gives the show its power. And that power is inseparable from the controversy. You can't have one without the other. The honesty creates the controversy, and the controversy validates the honesty. They need each other. Alright, I think we've been here long enough, and if you've made it this far, really, truly made it this far, then you already know what I think about this show. I think it's one of the most important pieces of cultural commentary that American television has produced. I think it's been wrong about a lot of things. I think it's been right about even more things. And I think the fact that it keeps going, keeps pushing, keeps refusing to be polite, is itself a kind of public service, especially when the individual episodes miss their mark. 28 seasons, 338 episodes, 6 banned episodes, $1 billion deal, 1 White House condemnation, 0 apologies. Well, okay, 2 mock apologies, 1 to China, 1 to Trump, neither of which was sincere. Let me leave you with a few final thoughts, because I've been thinking about this show's relationship with controversy for weeks now, and there are a couple of things I haven't said yet that I think are important. The first is about the fans. South Park's audience has changed dramatically over the course of nearly 3 decades. The people who watched the pilot in 1997 as teenagers are now in their mid-40s. They have kids. Some of those kids have probably watched South Park, and the show's relationship with its audience has evolved in ways that mirror the show's own evolution. In the early days, the fans were mostly young men who appreciated the shock humor. Now the fan base is broader, older, and more diverse in its reasons for watching. Some people watch for the political commentary, some watch for the character work, some watch for the nostalgia, and some still watch for the fart jokes. But here's what strikes me. The show has maintained a fan base across generations precisely because of its controversies, not in spite of them. Each new controversy introduces the show to a new audience. Kids who are too young to remember the Scientology saga in 2005 might discover South Park because of the Trump episodes in 2025. And then they go back and watch the old episodes and discover the layers of history underneath. The controversies are like geological strata. You can read them like a timeline of what America was worried about at every moment in the last 3 decades. The second thing I want to say is about the difference between controversy and courage. A lot of shows are controversial. A lot of comedians say offensive things. But controversy alone isn't impressive. What's impressive is consistent controversy over a long period of time against increasingly powerful targets with increasing personal risk. Making a poop joke in 1997 is controversial, but not courageous. Getting banned from China is courageous. Drawing the attention of real extremists who threaten to kill you is courageous. Having the White House issue an official condemnation of your cartoon is courageous. Not because the individual jokes are always right or always fair, but because the commitment to the principle that nothing is sacred, that fear shouldn't dictate what you can say, has been tested again and again at higher and higher stakes and has never wavered. The third thing is about legacy. What will South Park's legacy be ultimately? I think about this a lot because the show will end someday. Parker and Stone won't do this forever. And when it's over, what will people remember? Will they remember the fart jokes or the free speech advocacy? Will they remember the Muhammad death threats or the man-bear-pig correction? Will they remember Cartman feeding someone their parents or Kyle giving a speech about standing up to censorship? I think the answer is all of it, because South Park's legacy isn't any individual moment. It's the whole thing. The totality of 28 seasons of a show that refuse to be tamed. That's what makes it different from every other controversial show that's ever existed. Other shows have their controversial moments. South Park is a controversial moment. The entire thing, start to finish, is one long, sustained act of cultural provocation. And whether you think that's a gift or a burden, it's undeniably unique. I want to close with something Trey Parker said at Comic-Con in July 2025, right after the White House issued its condemnation of the season 27 premiere. A reporter asked him how he felt about the official response. Parker paused, looked at the camera, and said, "We're terribly sorry." And then he stared deadpan, for about 5 seconds, and the room exploded with laughter because everyone in that room understood what he was doing. He was doing the same thing he'd been doing since 1992. He was refusing to take the powerful seriously. He was using comedy to deflate authority, and he was having the time of his life doing it. That's South Park. That's always been South Park. And until the last episode airs, which at the rate they're going, won't be for a very long time, it's going to keep being South Park. Controversial, crude, brilliant, offensive, thoughtful, reckless, brave, and occasionally very, very wrong, but never, ever boring. And you know what? I think that's enough. In a media landscape full of shows that are perfectly calibrated to avoid offending anyone, perfectly designed to satisfy algorithms, perfectly optimized for engagement metrics, a show that is perfectly imperfect, that is defiantly itself, that would rather be hated for being honest than loved for being safe. That show has earned its place. Not because every joke lands, not because every take is correct, not because every controversy is justified, but because the commitment to the principle, say what you mean what you say, and never let fear make the decision for you, is genuine. And in a world that's increasingly driven by fear, genuineness is the most controversial thing of all. I started this video talking about a construction paper kid standing in a courtroom in Colorado. And I want to end by talking about two real guys standing on a red carpet in Los Angeles in the year 2000, wearing ball gowns, tripping on acid, about to attend the Academy Awards, because their movie about animated children starting a war over profanity was nominated for Best Original Song. Those two guys didn't know that they were going to spend the next 25 years fighting Scientology lawyers, Islamic extremists, the Chinese government, the MPAA, the Catholic Church, the Parents Television Council, and the White House of the United States of America. They didn't know their Christmas card would become one of the most successful media franchises in history. They didn't know their show would get people killed, or almost killed, or banned from entire countries, or turned into a billion-dollar empire built entirely on the principle that nothing is too sacred to mock. They were just two guys from Colorado, wearing dresses, trying to make each other laugh. And 25 years later, they're still doing exactly that. Except now, the dresses are metaphorical, and the laughter echoes across the entire world, whether the world wants to hear it or not. And if you can't sleep after all that, well, that's what the next video is for. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. It really does mean a lot. If you enjoyed this, hit that subscribe button. It helps more than you know. And I'll see you in the next one. Good night.